Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube today, Sam. We're going team by team once again. All 32 teams, best and worst case scenarios for the 2025 season.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm back. I'm using same setup, obviously, in the parents' gaff, but I've upped the quality. I found a hidden area of extra quality. I'm up to 1080p as opposed to 720, which we were stuck on before. So, you know, the unkempt beard is now visible in full HD.
You look like you're in 1080p. And look, for those asking, we are targeting a late July opening of the studio. We can get into the studio now. We're building it out, and we're gonna kick off the new season. We're gonna do it during training camp, like everyone else. We'll work out the kinks during training camp. Maybe we'll even have a joint practice with someone along the way and get ready for the season.
Joint practice in the studio.
Yes.
Maybe Renner.
Maybe Renner.
Joint practice with Renner.
We'll have some guests. We got to work out the kinks in the preseason, so we'll be ready to go for the rest of August and September. But yeah, that's the plan right now. We know Jair Alexander has signed with the Ravens. We'll talk about him during the Ravens segment. But we got 32 teams to discuss. You ready to go?
Let's go.
As always, we start in the AFC East. Not always, but most of the time. Buffalo Bills are up first. So we want to make sure this doesn't sound exactly like reasons for optimism and reasons for pessimism from a few weeks ago, but we're going to try to paint a picture of what the best case scenario looks like, what the worst case scenario looks like, given the roster right now. So best case for the Bills, obviously, is getting over the hump and winning that Super Bowl, Sam.
Yeah, I'm getting over a couple of humps, right? They've got to get over the first playoff hump, which is getting to the Super Bowl again, and then the second one, which is obviously winning a Super Bowl. Either which I think is well within their range of outcomes. I mean, I think Buffalo is genuinely a Super Bowl contending team. I don't think that their playoff history in the last few years represents some, critical, fatal flaw of this team or this roster construction or, is exposing something about this football team. I think they've just been beaten by some good teams at the sharp end of the season multiple times. And I don't think that necessarily has to reflect what's going to happen in the future. So, yeah, high-end range of outcome is absolutely being in and potentially winning a Super Bowl.
I wonder if it's worse for the Bills if we talk worst-case scenario. Is it worse to come close again? Like, is the worst-case scenario another 3-point loss to the Chiefs, another really close heartbreaker? Or is it something – they only win 9 games for some reason and miss the playoffs? Like, what's actually worse for the Bills and their fans?
No, I think you're right. I think, another, not even inexplicable, but another heartbreaking loss that, again, does not necessarily expose some sort of critical flaw. You just lose to another very good team in the dying moments. Ideally in terms of like nightmare scenario, in a game where Josh Allen has once again played extremely well and it wasn't enough, because again, like the more of those you stack on top of each other, the more it becomes difficult to talk yourself out of making some giant sweeping change at the end of the season. Like I've done this before, but I've likened Buffalo's sort of run in recent years to Leinster and how they keep losing in finals of Europe in particular and domestically as well. But like, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something massively wrong. Like I've heard somebody say recently, getting 2-3 finals in a row, right, is an achievement in and of itself. And it's not really, but it is representative of an extremely high level, which is, more important, I think, when you're trying to evaluate where do you go. So from Buffalo's point of view, like getting to these playoff runs time and time again, I don't think it is an achievement in and of itself, because teams can make the playoffs repeatedly and eventually you're like, nah, this is going nowhere. We got to make a change. But it is representative of how good they are. And more importantly, it means that I don't think you need to blow it up. But the more of those you stack on top of each other, the more difficult it is to talk yourself out of that at the end of any given season.
I think that's what people mean by achievement, though, is not so much, hey, hang the banner for it, AFC Championship participants, but don't blow it up. I think that's what that's the implication, I think, behind that type of phrase. As we wrap up the Bills, I do feel like that's the biggest challenge for Brandon Beane and company, is coming out of the season overreacting. I mean, that James, you're talking about a tush push away, or that fourth down, that QB sneak away from maybe turning the corner. That James Cook 1-yard run, which was spectacular. That could have gone either way. That would have been in, Buffalo Bills lore if they had pulled that off and gone to the Super Bowl. They are literally a handful of plays away. So I imagine the biggest challenge is not thinking too extreme every offseason and just saying, let's get a little bit better. Let's get a little bit better. And I do think the Bills have done that this offseason. So best case Super Bowl. I would say worst case is another heartbreaking loss rather than just another, like they lost by 2 or 3 scores to the Bengals a couple of years ago. I think that's probably more palatable than maybe the heartbreaker at this point.
But I think you're right. That's worse for them than a season that's like unexpectedly bad and actually does require some sort of serious course correction at the end of the year. Because that's correct, right? Like if that happens, if for some reason the Bills are unexpectedly poor this season, there is a critical flaw in the roster. Oh, look, they can't do X, Y, and Z. Then the logical answer to that in the offseason is, well, let's go fix this team. Let's rebuild. Let's do whatever needs to be done. Let's actually get back to where it needs to go. The worst thing is losing in a way that doesn't actually require any course correction, but you do it anyway. And, so now you're by definition pointing in a non-optimal direction. I think you're right. Like voluntarily getting worse is a worse outcome than trying to fix something that turns out is actually wrong with the team.
Next up, Miami Dolphins, best and worst case scenario. I feel like the worst case is similar to the Bills. And that is, obviously it could get worse than you beat all the bad teams. But I think the worst case could be that you continue to beat the bad teams and lose to the good teams. And that's, you didn't get over that hump as the Dolphins. Their roster might be in a little bit worse shape than that anyway. But where do you land here as far as best and worst case for Miami?
No, I think theirs is different. So I think their worst case is a conversation between, is it worse to be sort of trapped in this mediocrity level or for it to actually spiral out of control and need a complete tear down and rebuild and, detonation job? Because I think that's definitely within the range of outcomes of Miami in a way I don't think it really is for Buffalo. Like I cannot imagine that Bills team and roster flying apart at the seams over the course of this year and just completely imploding. I think you can imagine that pretty easily from Miami. Like this thing could blow up in a pretty spectacular way. The question is that worse than they just remain a team that's able to beat bad teams and not able to beat good teams, and they win 8 games and it's mediocre?
And best case, they do start showing signs of life and beating some good teams. So again, on this show, we could say, well, the best case scenario is they win the Super Bowl. We could say that. We would have underestimated what Washington would have done last year in their best case, but bear with us here. For me, best case is like you win a playoff game, you show you can compete, at least hang in there with the Chiefs, Bills, Ravens, best teams in the AFC when you get those opportunities. That's what I would say is best case. Here's part of the worst case for me is if this thing does implode this year and say Mike McDaniel's on the hot seat and or fired, I think that's a challenging discussion because he's probably the best option for Tua in his development. So if you have to fire McDaniel because he's not the best head coach option, Tua's career resurgence has been tied to McDaniel and having those playmakers too. But that would be, I think, a difficult one for Miami where it's like, all right, bring in the next coach. Who's going to get the most out of Tua when maybe it's Mike McDaniel who already has been getting the most out of him?
Yeah, there are some deep ramifications attached to making a change at head coach for Miami. And I think you're right. So back up a second. Buffalo, range of outcomes, optimistic side, Super Bowl is definitely within that. Is it for Miami? Because I think for this Dolphins team a year or two ago when they were sort of at their peak of whatever this current iteration is, and they could beat those teams, right? Like maybe not regularly, maybe not going to run, but like, they had a shot at beating Kansas City in miserable conditions late in this, in the postseason when they were calling edge rushers off the street and they were really banged up. Like if that team had stayed healthy, that team potentially could have beaten anybody in the AFC. Again, maybe not back to back to back, but like you would have said that team has Super Bowl within their range of outcomes. Does this one? Because I don't really feel like it does.
Super Bowl? No. I mean, look, I don't feel great about their roster relative to the last couple of years, but I'm also cautious not to write them off just because it doesn't like the team building effort doesn't feel great over the last couple of years. They still have a decent foundation with the QB, the pass catchers, and pass rushers. So I think they could still be good and competitive. But yeah, I agree. They're not as good as 2 years ago when they were going for it with, Jalen Ramsey and company.
So the best case for this team needs to be like they're competitive. Maybe they get into the playoffs. They acquit themselves well, albeit, maybe not even winning a playoff game, but they just don't embarrass themselves once they get there. And maybe not more importantly, but as importantly, the areas of weakness on the team actually show something for the future. Like Cam Smith, say a cornerback, looks like a guy that, can be part of the long-term future of this team. The young players on the defensive line, Chop Robinson continues to develop. And suddenly you're looking at this team. Kenneth Grant looks like a steal in the first round, blah, blah, blah. You're looking at this team and say, okay, clearly, we're not one of the best teams in the AFC, but we're at least this current project can continue and is back to sort of pointed in the right direction, and we can rebuild. And we're not wondering about, where are we going? This thing is falling apart. Do we have to make a change of coach? Like, you feel good about the direction of the team coming out of this season.
And the offensive line, the young players there start to look good. Of
Patrick
course,
Paul.
Worst case is they don't, and it's Tua's getting crushed back there. All right, we're through two teams. I don't know if we're going at the right pace here. Probably not. New England Patriots are up next. Look, I've said before, I think it's a wide range of outcomes. I think there's a best case scenario where they win 10, 11 games, probably say 10 games in New England and surprise. And that would have to coincide with Drake May going from, hey, this was pretty good in a bad situation to now he's good in a better situation. And we could see that's actually good to great. This guy's really, really good. And we've got a 10-win season here.
They have maybe the broadest range of outcomes of any team in the NFL. Their worst case scenario is they're the worst team in the NFL. Again, I would say. They could easily be the number one overall pick next year, if none of those young guys, like as much as youth equals optimism equals hope, they can also just be not good. So, we saw that last year. They threw a ton of young guys at wide receiver, at offensive line, and basically none of them showed anything. If that happens again, this team is probably destined to be the worst team in football. And that's the worst case. The best case for them, though, I do agree. I think this could be a playoff team. If that receiving core comes together, if Stephon Diggs keeps it together, if Kyle Williams looks like the best route runner in the draft right off the bat, if that group ends up being a positive for Drake May, if Will Campbell is in fact just a good left tackle, it doesn't matter about his stumpy little arms, lots can happen, right? The two areas of weakness could become strengths for this team. And if that happens, like there's enough teeth on defense anyway, they could win double-digit games. They could be a playoff team. Again, maybe they can't go on a run in the postseason, but who would have said Washington could a year ago? Like, playoff versus number one overall pick is the spread for this team.
Yeah, so I agree. You could paint that picture of Stephon Diggs, the 1-2 punch of Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis, the addition of Milton Williams up front so they could rush the passer better. They've added a lot of depth there. And the offensive line should be better. So you could easily paint this picture of everything's better, and Drake May goes from, impressive in a bad situation to impressive in a good situation. That's a 9 or a 10-win team. On the other hand, the other point that I kept making is it might take a year or two for this offensive line to figure it out. And Morgan Moses is getting a little bit older. Garrett Bradbury's battling with Jared Wilson. So you're either talking about a average to below average center, throughout his career in Bradbury, or a third-round center in Jared Wilson. Will Campbell, arms or not, doesn't matter. He's still a rookie, and rookie tackles don't always hit the ground running. So the offensive line could be bad still. Stephon Diggs, you put a lot of eggs into that one basket of him, turning things around. Yeah, you have Kyle Williams, but a lot of pressure on Stephon Diggs to be that top option for the Patriots. And, the investment on the defensive side of the ball, is it enough? They were coming from a deficit there from a talent perspective. So it looks good on paper, but it might not all hit. So I'm with you, man. If they win, they win 4 for the last 2 years? If they win, I think they'll be better than that, but I think I could see them winning 5 or 6. I could see them winning 10 and sneaking into the playoffs and people feeling good about the Drake May era here. Plus you got the Vrabel factor. And again, I really thought at one point he was going to be one of the next great coaches, the most consistent coaches. But because the roster really fell apart in Tennessee, so did Vrabel's record. He couldn't even overcome that. I mean, there's a good chance he's worth a couple wins.
Yeah.
In as long as the roster is not a disaster. And this looks like it's not a disastrous roster. There's just a lot of wait and see. Let's see how it all works together.
I think this is an interesting data point for Vrabel right off. Like, it's like the first year of without, when Tom Brady and Bill Belichick divorced, it's like the first year there. Yeah. We'll learn a lot about that relationship based off the first year of each one of those guys without the other. I think, and whether or not that's actually true or whether or not it just like fits into neat narratives. I think the same thing is true with Vrabel this year. Like, we're going to learn. It felt like Vrabel was overachieving with the talent he had in Tennessee basically every time they step foot on the field. This, I think, will be pretty telling if that's actually true, whether he's able to get more out of this New England personnel group than it looks like they're immediately capable of.
All right, rounding out the AFC East with the New York Jets, best and worst case scenario for the Jets. Where do you stand on this, Sam?
I guess the first part has got to be, what is the best case scenario for Justin Fields? Like, is it actually a future involving Fields as the starting quarterback, or is it just like the rest of the team looks good and then they can go and find a starting quarterback down the line? Because Fields is like he's a hedge or a bridge at the moment. Is the best case actually there's some sort of jump in Fields and they feel good about him as a starter that they can re-up in future?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I care if I'm a Jets fan. I don't know if I care if it's Justin Fields or if we're drafting someone next year. I don't know if that matters a whole lot. I mean, yeah, like there's a scenario where Justin Fields is what we thought he was 4 years ago, and he becomes a really good second chance quarterback. He's the next guy in line in the Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, rejuvenation project. So that is potential there. There is potential there. I think for me, it's more about how the team plays under Aaron Glenn. Like, if you remember Dan Campbell's early years with the Lions, they weren't winning games, but it was like, man, they're playing hard. There's something here. Eventually, even in their first season, they looked more competitive, even if it didn't show up in wins. And then by year 2, they turned a corner. I think if you just see some of that life coming from an Aaron Glenn coach team, I would say that too. Well, I'll put that in the worst case. I think with any first-year coach, they can look overwhelmed. You just don't know how a guy's going to handle it, right? Nathaniel is out there not knowing whether or not to call timeout or kick a field goal with at the end of a game. So I guess you could say that for every first-year head coach. I just don't know how he's going to handle game situations. I don't know if he's going to be a motivator. I don't know how he's going to handle those things. Worst case for the Jets is, they're picking number 1 overall. It's not a great roster. Certainly don't have one of the best quarterback situations on paper unless Fields does take a step forward. I keep calling them a high floor team, though, just because of his rushing ability. But, of course, it might not matter with, not a great group of pass catchers, defense with a lot of overhaul. But, yeah, I still think the Jets end up being sneaky good this year, at least really competitive under Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, I don't know if they have number 1 overall pick potential because of Fields. Like, I think we've talked about tank-proof quarterbacks in the past. I think he's too dynamic as a physical playmaker to lose 14 games, I think. And actually, I think their worst case scenario is Fields remains who he is, which is clearly not the guy you want as a long-term starter, but too talented to lose every game. And the Jets end up winning, 6 or 7 games,
6 or 7,
which is enough to pick, 12th overall. But be nowhere near the quarterback that you want, but also clearly not have the quarterback that you want on the roster at the moment. So I think the worst case for the Jets is actually they're annoyingly competitive, but clearly don't have a quarterback, clearly need one, and don't really have a shot at one.
I can see that.
I think you're right, though. There's always a nightmare scenario for a first-time head coach, which is they just suck. And I don't know which one of those things takes precedence. Like, if Aaron Glenn is terrible, but Justin Fields is still Justin Fields, like, which one of those things wins out over the course of 17 games and how many games do they win? I don't know quite what the balance is there. The best case for I keep thinking about this Fields thing. Like, I do think that there is some jump to be had there. That being said, There was a highlight reel video doing the rounds on Twitter the other day that was like all of the whatever year that Ohio State team that was just dominant, where Fields went on that run, played through the busted ribs, blah, blah, blah. And okay, the playmaking is insane. It's still there. But you looked with hindsight, like this was kind of obvious from his tape at the time, but with hindsight, like every single one of his plays is just drop back, slowly stare down a target for like 3 seconds until the guy's open and then fire the ball in his direction. It's like
Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, JSN. Yes.
I mean, it bugged me at the time, but now like knowing that's kind of how he plays the game, it's so painful watching him do it. It's like, dude, come on, like come off that target, go somewhere else. And it's difficult to say that in college because the guy did eventually become open because it was Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave or whoever else. Like, so I do think that there is a jump to be made, but that needs to change. You can't do that in the NFL and be successful as a starting quarterback. So I guess the best case is still, somebody is able to unlock something in Justin Fields where he's able to go through those progressions faster. He's able to just, again, it's more the green light needs to come on in his head, right? That's there. Put it in the air. Don't second think it. Don't wait for the guy to uncover. Just go, fire. If that happens, I do think Justin Fields could emerge like as their quarterback of the future. And then suddenly like everything's good. The roster is still, it's not great. It's worse than it has been a couple of years ago, but it's still pretty good. And if they suddenly find a quarterback, in Fields who's got that athletic potential and kicks on as a passer, I mean, then everything's good.
All right, let's go NFC East here, starting with the Dallas Cowboys. Best and worst case scenario for the Cowboys.
I mean, worse is like it all unspools. The offensive line stinks. Dak Prescott has a bad season because the offensive line stinks. Everyone is calling for his head, even though he's on a $60 million a year contract and you're stuck with him for a while. And, everything's bad. Like Schottenheimer's getting pilloried for being in over his head. George Pickens completely unravels outside of Pittsburgh within 5 minutes. Like the whole thing just becomes a complete circus.
Shouty show fodder every day in Dallas.
Stephen A. Smith, with the cowboy hat, just chuckling every Monday morning like that. The whole thing.
They're calling for Joe Milton off the bench.
Yes.
Yeah, that is the worst case scenario for Dallas. I would also, just from like a football perspective, we've said a lot on this show. They're a team that has not dabbled in free agency a whole lot. A couple of years ago they did, and I thought they picked their spots pretty well with either trades or free agency with Stephon Gilmore and Brandon Cooks. But the last 2 off seasons haven't done it a lot. They just did it with George Pickens. We'll see what happens there. But what has sustained them is the drafting. You're drafting a Micah Parsons, drafting a CD Lamb, and they for the whole last decade, right? Say going back 15 years, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick. I mean, they revolving door of good offensive linemen that they've drafted. If that runs out, and we talk a lot about drafting luck in 3 to 5 year cycles, it's really difficult to sustain it for the next 3 to 5. I think the Cowboys are coming out of a cycle where had been one of the best. In these last couple of years, doesn't look as good with Mozzie Smith in the first, with Tyler Guyton in the first. Like Guyton's got to get better. We'll see what happens with Booker. And so if they've hit the bad run of drafting these last couple of years, and they're not outside of Pickens really supplementing this roster, then this thing gets a lot worse. And then if you want to ask about the first-year head coach, I'm not going to say this for every first-year head coach, but Brian Schottenheimer was not coveted by any other team besides the Dallas Cowboys. So if he's not ready to be a head coach, there's a really low floor for the Cowboys. I'm not saying they're picking number 1 overall, but there's a low floor relative to recent expectations for the Cowboys this year because of all of these, all the turnover, uncertainty in the draft, and the new head coach.
I mean, the Cowboys in the last few years have made a bunch of moves that are basically counter to what everyone believes to be optimal strategy, right? Whether it's in drafting, whether it's in free agency, whatever it is, they've done a lot that is non-standard, atypical approach to everything. Contracts, the whole 9 yards, right? So the worst case scenario is if it turns out the conventional wisdom is correct and going away from it as aggressively as you have been is objectively dumb, and you just made your team worse at every one of these steps. And this is the year that all of those gambles, come back, like they cash in and they all crap out, right? And the whole thing just blows up in Jerry Jones' face. That's the worst case scenario, is that everything you did in the last few years that everybody said at the time was not the way you should be doing it was in fact wrong, and you're not the smartest guy in the room, and you just unbuilt a consistent 12-win football team in a couple of years. The best case scenario for them, I think, is tied back to that last couple of draft classes and really the offensive line. If Tyler Guyton takes a jump, if Cooper Beebe continues what is actually a really encouraging pathway for him in year one, and if Tyler Booker, if you're right and everyone else is wrong and drafting him at 12 overall was the smart thing to do, if that trio, can become the new nucleus for this offensive line, in addition to, Tyler Smith, who does look like a home run pick that you made a few years ago, and maybe Terrence Steele, even if he doesn't get back to being his best, but is just fine as the right tackle. Like, if that group becomes a really plus offensive line again, well, now Dak Prescott can play his best football, and we've already seen he's capable of, really, really high level, all pro level play if he gets an elite offensive line, a good receiving core for an entire year. CeeDee Lamb is fantastic. If George Pickens keeps it together and can now, feast on number 2 corners all year because CeeDee Lamb is the number 1 guy in that offense. There is a world where that all works and it looks incredible because we've already seen like what a version of this offense is capable of with that talent.
Oh, absolutely. And so then I think at the end of the season, when they had a very talented team over the last few years, we just said, okay, well, I don't know how to solve this. I don't know how to solve the win in the playoffs deal. Guess throw that in the best case scenario. Not so much winning a playoff game. They've done that before. But can Shoddy be the guy that, for whatever reason, gets them playing loose in the playoffs and gets them to a playoff win? So,
but getting them over that mental block somehow.
But not just winning a wild card round game. Like, they've won games before. I would say every year now, success for the Cowboys is like at least make it back to the NFC Championship. Are they the only NFC team that hasn't been back since they won a Super Bowl
like
in
1990 something?
Like every year now, it's going to be at least show you could get to the NFC Championship. If you want to have heartbreak there, you lose a heartbreaker to the Eagles or the Niners or what, that's fine. At least make it back there.
And not visibly implode. Like, that's their problem, is you can see, like, unlike Buffalo, where you're like, I don't think any loss over the last X number of years is indicative of like mental weakness or, Achilles heels in the team. They've just lost to good teams. That happens, right? Dallas is, you can look at this team and you can say, look, they should have won this game. Like, the word choker gets thrown around a lot, but they choked. Like, they visibly choked. And I don't think that's true most of the time when that criticism is thrown around. I do think it's true for Dallas. This is a team that knows they haven't gone on this run, since the late 90s. Like, they are fighting that history, and it is visibly causing them problems. Somehow their best case scenario needs to involve getting that monkey off their back. And I don't know how far they need to progress for that monkey to no longer be there.
All right, let's go New York Giants. This is an interesting one here. Giants, best and worst case scenarios, Sam.
Their best case scenario is that Jackson Dart doesn't see the field this year. So
I'm trying to separate what's the best case scenario for the Giants organization from what's the best case scenario for Joe Shane, fourth-year GM, and Brian Daboll, fourth-year GM. Because a Giants fan theoretically doesn't care who the head coach or the GM is. They just want to have success. So I don't think they care if there's a new coach or a new GM a year from now. And I've made this. You want to know what the best case scenario is? They show signs of life. Joe Shane gets fired. Steve gets the GM job. That's the best. The best case scenario for the Giants is Joe Shane. Thank you for your service. You didn't do enough for 4 years, but you left a nice nucleus. Thank you for Malik Neighbors. Thank you for Abdul Carter and Darius Alexander. Thank you for the nucleus of players. I'll take it from here.
What a self-serving best case scenario.
Sure is. It sure is.
I think the best case scenario is that Jackson Dart doesn't see the field, because that means the Giants are good enough that they haven't had to play him. It means that Russell Wilson has shown enough signs of life that he can, steer a football team that has a lot of young talent now and make them competitive every single game. And they're winning enough games that they're not having to make something drastic happen, whether that's Jameis Winston or whether that's Jackson Dart. And, obviously you can't tell all these things from the sideline, but effectively they feel good about Jackson Dart just from practice, just from what he's doing in meeting rooms. He's still the future. Like, I'm not saying, when Carson Palmer didn't play for his entire rookie season, it's not like Cincinnati was like, oh no, we've got, we made a mess of this one. Everyone still felt good about Carson Palmer when he was going to see the field. Same thing with Jackson Dart. We feel good about him from the sideline, from his position as number 3, but Russell Wilson has shown enough signs of, not even signs of life. He's shown enough good play that we're comfortable with him being the starting quarterback this year. The team has won enough games, and Joe Schoen gets to continue what he's been doing, which is actually assembling a pretty good young nucleus for this football team. Like this, there's a lot of young talent now on the Giants. And if they just have enough savvy and quality at quarterback, they could surprise people. Like, I think their best case scenario is actually they're competitive every week. They scare a team like Philadelphia or within the division, Washington, maybe not beat them, but like at least they don't get waxed every time they play one of those good teams. And we feel good about the Giants coming out of the season, and they can still turn it over to Jackson Dart, who can, actually take advantage of the good roster.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, when you're picking in the top 6 most of the time, you should have some good young players like Malik Neighbors and Abdul Carter. So, and by the way, I'm completely joking on calling for Joe Schoen's job. But I think when you're talking about the Giants' best and worst case scenario, as a Giants fan, I don't know if you care if there's a new regime a year from now, but I think you want, best case, I think you want this defensive line to look really good. We're going to rank the best units in the NFL,
right?
Best defensive lines, best corners, whichever position group is the best. You can make a case that the Giants have the best defensive line in the NFC East, by the way, which includes Micah Parsons and the Cowboys, which includes the Super Bowl champion Eagles. I don't know if Eagles fans want to have that conversation, if they want to hear it, if we're just too early with Abdul Carter and some of their additions there. But I mean, there's a real case here. So I would say defensive line carries this team. I'm with you on Jackson Dart. We get another data point of a QB not playing as a rookie and seeing what they do in year 2 with J.J. McCarthy. I would love, if you're the Giants, for that to be the case where Dart doesn't have to see the field and you say, we're doing everything we can to be good in 2026.
Yeah. Last year's rookie class continues to look great, improve, get better. Every single one of them looked good year 1. That continues. And then it also has to involve the scenario where Cam Scatterboo is just the dominant beast that he was in college as well. Like everyone overthought the Scatterboo thing in the draft, and it turns out that this guy is just an absolute freaking monster in the NFL as well as college. Tyrone Tracy gets to continue being a dynamic, change of pace, backup with complement, and you suddenly have like the most dominant thunder and lightning backfield of football.
Worst case scenario for the Giants is they're picking in the top 5 again. We need to move on, but
worst case scenario for the Giants has got to involve being confused about Jackson Dart coming out of this year with a position to draft his successor.
Okay, so, Russ is too good. They're picking at 13. Dart sees the field late.
No, or you may have you lose enough games to be picking in the top 5, but like you saw a couple of really good Jackson Dart games, you saw a couple of disastrous games, and you kind of came out of the season, you're like, well, we're in position to draft a quarterback. We only drafted this guy at the bottom of the first round last year, albeit trading back up to get him, and we don't know what to do. Like, stick or twist.
All right, let's go Philadelphia Eagles. Best and worst case for the Eagles. Obviously, best case is you're going to win another Super Bowl. You're going back to back. The dynasty or dynasty talk, Sam, begins for Philadelphia because they win again.
Yep. No, I think that's fair and accurate. Like, obviously, they're the defending Super Bowl champions. They didn't get noticeably worse this offseason. Therefore, the best case scenario for them is they repeat back-to-back champions. That's easy.
So the worst case is interesting because if you told me the 2023 Eagles were going to have a midseason implosion, I mean, that no one could predict that. So I guess that's in the range of outcomes. Midseason implosion where you can't play defense, you can't pick up a blitz, you can't do anything on either side of the ball. You go from literally looking like the best team in football to a bottom 3 team. That they gave us, talk about data points. Very rarely do you get a team that's playing bottom 5 football in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that was the Eagles. They looked like one of the 5 worst teams in the NFL at the end of 2023. We got to see them in the playoffs because they had started 10-1. I'm not going to call that worst case. I would say that it's a slight transition year because of the youth movement on, say, the defensive line. But that's being nitpicky here for a great Eagles roster.
Well, even if we say that that is their worst case, I think that shows you how high the floor is for this football team. Like most teams in the NFL, their worst case involves some sort of total implosion whereby, they're a bad football team, they're destined for a top 10 overall pick, whatever, like the whole thing on spools. We already saw the worst case scenario, essentially, for this Eagles football team. And it was bad. Number one, they were playing atrociously. Number two, they didn't get any better whatsoever once they got to the playoffs. They got absolutely annihilated. And number three, we got really close. And we should sort of remember this now. We got this close to Nick Sirianni getting relieved of his duties. Let's call it that way, right? They basically had, a come to Jesus meeting, and they were like, convince us that you're the guy to piece this back together. Because part of that collapse was that everything Sirianni did to try and fix it made it worse, right? Like they made coaching changes, and the changes had the opposite effect of the ones they were trying to have. Everything they did to try and stop this thing imploding only accelerated the collapse. So they had the meeting and said, all right, convince us as ownership that you are the guy to put this back on track. And he successfully did that. And then the following year, they're Super Bowl champions. Like they're like this. Not only did he save his job, but he then completely put it on back, got a championship at the end of it. So that, I think, is fascinating how close this came to a completely different, counterfactual and alternate reality. But I think that is the worst case scenario for Philadelphia. Somehow something collapses, a foundation stone falls over and the whole thing wobbles and falls over. But like, they probably still make the playoffs and they just have a bad playoff performance and get bounced. And, we're back to, well, Sirianni's got enough credit in the bank. He'll be the guy to put it back together again. And we go again. Like, it's just a non feel good season for Philadelphia that still involves winning a lot of games and probably making the playoffs.
All right, let's wrap up the NFC East here with the Washington Commanders. Best case and worst case scenario. Again, if we had said this last year at this time, we'd be like, Jaden Daniels looks good as the best case. We would have underestimated going to the NFC Championship, of course. But how would you characterize best and worst case scenario heading into 2025?
So am I doing them a disservice to say that their best case scenario is basically repeating what they did a year ago, like avoiding a step backwards?
No, because look, I don't know if the fan bases always look at that, but I mean, were the Lions a better team than the Commanders last year? Yes.
Yes.
Did the Commanders beat the Lions in the playoffs to go to the NFC Championship? Also, yes. So I would more position it as the best case scenario is not so much where they finish, but I would say that they look like a better team start to finish this year than last year, and they look like a team at the level of it. And again, like, if you have to earmuffs this, Commanders fans, fine. I'm like, you weren't as good as the Lions last year, but you won the game. But if you show that you're going to be in that mix with the Eagles, with the Lions, with the best teams, because they still got to the NFC, like the Lions would have given the Eagles a better game in the NFC Championship. That's my thought on it. So I would say show that you're more competitive with the best teams in the NFC week in, week out. Listen, I know you beat the Eagles. I know you beat the Lions. I get it. But week in, week out, show that you're taking that next step as a roster. And if that ends up it could end up in a divisional loss, could end up in an NFC Championship loss again, but show that the ascent is continued. And let's say one more. How much have we talked about Jaden Daniels? Like, let's give it one more year before we see Jaden Daniels in the rise to stardom. I would just say looks like a star once again, doesn't have any semblance of a sophomore slump like CJ Stroud, like Baker Mayfield, like RG3, like some of the other guys over the last 10 years.
Yeah, because I think realistically, if they were able to basically repeat what they did a year ago and not take a step backwards and just look like one of the best teams again, that would be that feels to me like their best case scenario. On the other hand, it feels like they should be capable of winning a Super Bowl just based off what we saw last year. I mean, okay, in the NFC Championship game, they got fairly well annihilated by Philadelphia, who looked like they were comfortably the better football team. But not that many weeks previously, they had beaten Philadelphia. And not that many weeks previous to that, they had not almost beaten is losing, but they had given them a much tighter game than they gave them in the NFC Championship game, right? So it feels like this team is capable of winning games like that. And it only takes one more of those games like that to be in a Super Bowl. So it feels sort of mean to be like, well, that's not within their range of outcomes this year. But I do feel like just not regressing, last year, I think, was an overachievement based off, like, they were a team that was much better than people thought they would be and went on a playoff run basically because Jaden Daniels took over and went nuts. So it feels like that's an overachievement. And if they could simply be in the playoffs again and also go on a run because Jaden Daniels remains nuts, like, that's as good as they can hope for.
I would say on the worst case scenario, it's just a regression. I mean, because they overachieved last year.
Yeah.
I thought that the defensive line got beat up in some big games, including against the Eagles, right? They were not good against the run on the Thursday night game or in the NFC Championship. I don't think they rushed the passer all that well. I know they had a lot of sacks, mid-tier PFF pass rush grade as a team, right? So if they just revert back or regress back record-wise, because it's still not a great roster, I think, relative to what they did last year. Yeah. Now, I think they've gotten better and added Tunsil and added Deebo Samuel. But one part of the worst case scenario is if it feels like year two under the Texans, where there's still a lot of good there, but you didn't feel like you were going to compete. Like, there was no point where you felt like, well, the Texans are going to compete with the best teams in the AFC and make a run here. So that's the difference, right? You want to feel like you're going to at least capable of making a Super Bowl run versus by the divisional round or whatever, you don't feel like you have much of a chance. I think that's in the range of outcomes here for the Commanders as well, including, for whatever reason, Jaden Daniels has some kind of sophomore slump. I think that would be on the low end of outcomes here.
There's a lot of similarities with the Texans a year ago when you think about it. I mean, everyone felt good about
Tunsil.
Yeah. But everyone felt good about Houston coming out of last season. Again, they were unexpectedly good. Like, when we did this a couple of days ago, when they made those trades, or that trade for Will Anderson, we were like, that's insane, in part because this football team is terrible and they could be picking in the top 5 next year. In fact, they were favorite, I think, heading into that season to pick like number 1 and number 2 based off the picks that they had. And then they end up being ridiculously good. Or Arizona, rather, was favored, right? Because that's who they'd given their pick up to. They were favored to pick number 1 and number 2 because they had Houston's draft pick. Instead, Houston looks really good. And then they make moves that offseason that say, we're not just here for the future, like, we're going to win now. They were making moves to, like, be a contender. And that's similar to what Washington has done. Like, they've gone and gotten Deebo Samuel, who's not like a long-term future deal. They've gotten Laramie Tunsil, who's a win now type of move as well. Like, they're making those types of moves. So, I think the worst case for them is some combination of last year's Texans or the Giants from a few years ago, where they got to the playoffs unexpectedly. They won a playoff game unexpectedly, and they felt good about themselves, and they, got too cocky, and they gave Daniel Jones the contract and blah, blah, blah. So some kind of like clear regression based off last year being an overachievement is, I think, the worst case for them. And that probably involves, exposure on both sides in terms of coaching. I mean, we've seen this Cliff Kingsbury thing go before, where it started pretty good and then, hit a wall or got stale, ran out of ideas, whatever. Like, that Kingsbury, Jaden Daniels axis not being able to continue to get better, I think would be a concern.
All right, let's go AFC North. Baltimore Ravens, best and worst case scenario. I mean, I think the Ravens, similar to the Bills here, they go do it. They go win the Super Bowl, make it to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, and finally get over the hump, whether it's the Chiefs, the Bills, they do it.
Yeah. Good news. The heavy equipment to rip up the driveway has arrived outside the window.
Nice.
Yeah.
They haven't started. I don't hear anything.
Oh, that's good.
So that's, I don't hear anything right now.
Yeah. Best case scenario for Baltimore. They're in the category where winning a Super Bowl is absolutely within the range of outcomes and should be considered their, best case scenario. Ideally, again, winning it with Lamar Jackson being sort of clear and obvious driver within the playoffs. I mean, that had been a big part of his story as an NFL quarterback. Yeah, sure, he's got MVPs, but can he do it in January against Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City? And this is, I said Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the NFL right now, and doubled down on it. And our friend Nick Wright is like, and he's ripping that apart in his show. But a lot of other Chiefs fans have been like, look, until Josh Allen beats Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, how can you possibly call him, the best quarterback? And that's Lamar Jackson's getting that as well. Like, you can win the MVPs, you can do whatever you want in the regular season, but Mahomes is the guy who goes on the run in the playoffs and turns it on and plays his best football when the chips are down. And unless you can do that, you're never going to be seen as his equal, right? And quarterbacks dealt with that when they were playing Tom Brady as well. And that's just the way people are going to view this. At least last season, Lamar Jackson actually played well in the playoffs. Like, that had been a problem for him for his career. So, yes, getting past Mahomes, getting to the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl, all those kinds of things, I think part of their best case scenario also involves Lamar Jackson remaining Lamar Jackson in the playoffs and being a big part of that, run and success and winning, like him balling out.
I'm not sure the Ravens care as long as they win, like how it happens. If they win, they won the AFC championship. They lost the AFC championship game 17-10 to the Chiefs a couple years ago. I don't think they care if they win 17-10. No, and Lamar doesn't have his best game. They just want to find a way to win. I mean,
obviously for this year, it doesn't matter, right? Like, the goal is to win a championship. And if you win a championship, it doesn't matter if, like, Lamar Jackson, even if he's not the quarterback and some backup takes you the rest of the way, like Nick Foles. But in terms of, I do think it's important because there might be something to the idea that he hasn't been a particularly good playoff quarterback and might not be able to do what he does in the playoffs, whether that's a mental block, whether it's other, like, the best teams are better at limiting him, whatever it is. Like, him answering that and saying, okay, that's just not a thing anymore. Like, you're not actually capable of stopping me in the playoffs, and I'm able to do what I do to other teams in the postseason. I think that's important for their long-term future, to be comfortable that Lamar, like MVP Lamar Jackson, is still as big a force in the playoffs as he is in the regular season.
The other part of the best case scenario, they already have a good roster. They have a good roster every year. Eric DeCosta is as good as it gets, right up there with Howie Roseman, wherever you want to rank the best GMs in football. They just added Jair Alexander to that secondary at what the biggest question mark on that team, cornerback 2, where you have Marlon Humphrey, who will play outside or inside. So you call him your nickel. Last year's first-round pick, Nate Wiggins. So you have 2 corners there. They brought in Chidobe Awuzie as kind of a reclamation project here. But that was one of the biggest questions on the team. Now they get to buy low on Jair Alexander. And that's what happens when you're a good team, a good roster, a team that's, set up to win 11, 12, 13 games every year. You get to buy low on a Jair Alexander and say, hey, is this going to be the thing that puts us over the top? So I think Jair can still play. He could definitely still play. And so the ball hawks that they have, including Malachi Starks, first-round safety, Kyle Hamilton, I mean, just the addition of Jair gives them the potential to have the very best secondary in the NFL. Potential, you need a couple things to break here, including Starks as a rookie and Jair to play the whole season. He's played like 50% of snaps over the last 4 years. But if he's healthy, incredible move here for Baltimore.
Yeah, and they just have so much flexibility within that secondary now. Like, Marlon Humphrey can be the nickel corner. He can also play outside if they need him to. Kyle Hamilton can be any safety. Like, he can be the free safety, he can be the strong safety, he can be a nickel as well if you need him to. So those 2 guys on their own give them the capacity to move basically anybody wherever they want within that secondary. I was fine with this secondary when they brought in Chidobe Awuzie to be the sort of contingency starting corner and be set there. Now, like, Awuzie becomes your backup. Like, that's a great situation to be. He would start on, several football teams in the NFL on merit. Whether or not they wanted to give him the contract to do that or not, I think is a different matter. But he's a starting caliber corner, and he's now the first guy off the bench for the Ravens. Jair Alexander, as you say, there's a question about his durability now. There's a question about sort of general, attitude and the way he does things. But, like, the upside for him is being one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. So there's so much potential within this group now. And yeah, if they bringing in a guy like Alexander, I mean, there isn't a roster in the NFL that he wouldn't make better. And there might not be a starting unit in the NFL that he wouldn't make better as well. So for them to get him and be able to bring him in on what was already a championship caliber roster is an amazing boost for them.
Really quickly, as far as worst case goes, would you agree it's similar to the Bills? Another heartbreak, another Mark Andrews drop. 2 years ago, it was Lamar interception in the red zone, Zay Flowers fumble at the goal line. I feel like it's another divisional or conference championship heartbreak for the Ravens.
Yes, but with the added element of the Lamar Jackson playoff thing again. I mean, you could say he answered that last year by actually playing really well in the postseason, and he did. I mean, he executed the drive that should have got them there, and then Mark Andrews drops the football, and that's how they don't end up winning. But what if that was if he goes this year and they lose a heartbreaker, but again, Lamar didn't show up in the postseason, or it was not the same, or it was a pretty rough performance? That would be a concern for them. Like, obviously you've seen that he can do it, but it's now pretty extensive. Like if they go, if they go on a run this year, let's say they win the first playoff game, Lamar doesn't play well, but they're just such a better football team than whoever it is they're playing in the first round. Second round, maybe they face the Chiefs or whatever, and Lamar doesn't play well. He gets outplayed by Patrick Mahomes, and they still make it close because they're a good football team, but ultimately, a bad Lamar drive right at the death and they don't win. That would be damaging for them, I think. Obviously, it would be a heartbreaker and blah, blah, blah. Same with the Bills, but with the added layer of almost every year of his career now, arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, like multiple-time MVP, has not looked like that guy in the postseason.
All right, let's go Cincinnati Bengals. Best and worst case scenario here for the Bengals. I was pretty high on them last year, thinking, hey, they could win the division. I'm still going to have those expectations with Burrow and the two receivers. So, I think I'm not saying they're better than the Ravens. I think the Ravens have a better all-around team. But I think for Cincinnati, best case is they go back to the Super Bowl where they were just a few years ago.
It is. I mean, it feels like it shouldn't be because I think there's a lot more flaws to this roster than there are for some of the other teams we've said that for.
Right.
But given the areas of strength, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, it is last year, they had one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year. And if they had the last domino to fall, they needed 15 things to break their way in the last couple of weeks of the season, and 14 of them did. If the 15th went their way, there's not a team in the NFL that would have been happy to see the Bengals coming to town in the playoffs, including Kansas City, Buffalo. Like, those teams would not have been loving that. Would they have beaten them anyway? Maybe, possibly, probably, whatever. But the point is, this team is capable of beating any of those teams and going on a Super Bowl run. And they would have been a year ago, even with a worse defense than theoretically they should have.
And the defense is not devoid of talent. It's not like you're trotting out this talentless defense.
Less Trey Hendrickson doesn't play.
Maybe
it is.
Right. So this is best case is Trey Hendrickson gets signed. Yeah. Jamar Stewart gets signed. Of course, in this best and worst case scenario show, we could easily say, well, worst case scenario is people get hurt. We're trying to avoid the injury thing. But when you're evaluating the 2024 Bengals defense, you have to say, hey, they lost their two starting corners. And say what you want about Cam Taylor-Britt, but Dax Hill and DJ Turner, both looking pretty good early in the season, get hurt. So just having Al Golden come in as defensive coordinator could change things. So there's a best case scenario where the defense creeps back toward average. The offense is still elite. And the Bengals are competing with the Ravens, Chiefs, and Bills, where, by the way, most of when Joe Burrow's healthy career, they're in that mix, right? They've been in the mix in 2 AFC championships. They've had a great record against Kansas City, a great record against Buffalo. And so they're back there. That's your best case scenario for Cincinnati. Of course, worst case is the defense is just as bad as last year. And maybe the offensive line that has the same question marks it had 4 years ago, right? They seem to get better for a couple of years, but then, they're back toward question mark land on the offensive line, and that could be a hindrance for that offense.
Yeah, another non-playoff year is probably the worst case scenario for this team in pretty much any capacity. If it's a disaster, people are probably getting fired and, we go in a different direction. But a repeat of a year ago would be, I think, as damaging, honestly. They're dangerous. They can win any given game with that offense. but it's not enough over the course of a season and they don't make the playoffs. And suddenly we're talking about wasting Joe Burrow's career and, oh, it's the same old Bengals and, blah, blah, blah.
The best case scenario, too, is that we get our press passes to go to Paycor.
We can get to a game.
We get to
as members of the what Bugler, what old 1930s newspaper were we rocking?
Cincinnati Bugler. Yeah,
whatever, like the local Financial Dispatch.
We just want our bulk skyline at halftime. That's all we're asking for.
Oh God, I'd be willing to not eat that if it meant getting a press pass.
Cleveland Browns, best and worst case scenario.
Best case scenario. I mean, is the best case scenario one of those young quarterbacks is actually good? Like Shador or Dylan Gabriel looks like they are the future.
I mean, obviously you would feel good about that, but you also are well positioned for the next mystery box next year.
That's the thing.
But if, like, say one of those guys is good, Shador or Dylan Gabriel, and now you're heading into next year and you don't think you need a quarterback, you have your future quarterback and you have 2 first-round picks, then you start to use those first-round picks to build that roster and you take advantage of the move that you made this year.
Yeah, I think it has to be one of those 2 guys working out. I mean, the Brock Purdy thing, that was the best contract in football until they had to give him the next contract. So if either, and Gabriel, as a 3rd rounder can fit into this as well, but if either of those guys, if you come out of this season thinking, like if they have a Brock Purdy type of first year and you're like, wow, this guy can be the future. Absolutely. Let's go. Now you've got next year's draft capital that you had kind of hedged, like the same as the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts. Remember, they had done the same kind of thing. They'd amassed an extra first the following year as well, just in case Jalen Hurts did not get any better than he did in his first year. And they were able to go, okay, let's pivot. Let's go get the next quarterback. And then Hurts looks really good. And they go, okay, now we can use these 1st-round picks and build a roster. That's for the Browns, right? They need another year just to get rid of Deshaun Watson, but they come out of this season almost regardless of how many games they've won with either Dylan Gabriel or Shador Sanders looking like the next Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, guy that's going to ball out with a lower draft status. And then they can use 2 first-round picks next year on supporting weaponry and, patching up areas of the roster that are going to be falling apart.
I would also add to that, Mason Graham looks good. I mean, if best case scenario is you want all parts of the strategy of trading down from number 2 to look good. And so part of why I loved that move for the Browns was not only picking up next year's 1st rounder, but because I loved Mason Graham.
Yeah.
And thought, okay, he's one of the 4, 5, 6 players that I would really want to come out of this draft with. And I think the Browns did that, plus got the first rounder. So I think if he looks really good, that defensive line looks rejuvenated, maybe closer to the 2023 version where the Browns had one of the best defenses in the NFL. That's part of this best case scenario as well. And then again, like other teams, I would say the youth movement, all of the draft capital that they use this year on good, solid football players, the Carson Schweschingers, the Quinyon Judkins, and Dylan Sampsons, those guys become a part of the rebuild nucleus here for the Browns. Worst case scenario is the quarterbacks aren't good, and maybe Kenny Pickett plays more football than you'd like to see, and just things are awful. I mean, they could just be really bad. I mean, and it's not even the worst. I mean, then you're picking top 5 maybe, and maybe that's not the worst case scenario, but maybe they're one of the teams that's like, we don't really know on the rookie quarterbacks, and the Jags play well, so we don't have a top 10 pick from them, and maybe Kenny Pickett's good enough that they win 6 or 7, and they're the team picking in the middle of the 1st round.
Yeah, that's I think is the worst case. Is the combination of draft picks that they have next year is bad enough. So I think the worst case is that they're confident enough that none of the quarterbacks they have in the roster are the future. So Gabriel didn't show enough, Shador didn't show enough. Maybe the Shador circus is a disaster during the season as well, just for added fun. But the point is they come out of the season needing to use those 1st-round draft picks next year on the next quarterback. Only both of those draft picks are too low for it to really be for you to guarantee the guy. And maybe next year's draft class is not as good as people want it to be either. And suddenly you're looking at the class a little bit like this year, and you're saying maybe this is a 1 or a 2 quarterback strong class, and we're picking 15 and 23. You're like, that's tough. Like that's going to be costly to get up to that guy.
All right, man. Pittsburgh Steelers rounding out the AFC North. What are the best and worst case scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think the best case scenario for the Steelers is still legitimate contender. Like I do. And I don't think it's because of Rodgers. I think it's because I saw somebody recently, I can't remember who I saw this list, but it was like ranking the top 10 defenses in the NFL. And the Steelers did not appear on that list at all as a top 10 defense. I think this defense I think it has the potential to be nasty. Like that defensive front is freakishly good. Joey Porter is a perfectly good starting caliber man cover corner. They added Darius Slay, who even at this point in his career fits into that same category. Micah Fitzpatrick, they've got players on the back end. Peyton Wilson, like the linebacker core is pretty useful. I think this is easily a top 10 defense and a top 10 defense with the capacity to carry a team. And if Aaron Rodgers can just be like, I don't know, game manager, but the version of Aaron Rodgers we saw a year ago with a slightly more competent defense or offensive scheme around him, I think the Steelers are a team that even in a murderer's row AFC can make the playoffs and potentially beat teams once they get there.
I agree on the defense, man. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig, and you add Jack Sawyer. Okay, so I think you're 4 deep off the edge. Say what you want about Sawyer. It doesn't matter. I mean, the top
what if he's good?
He could be.
He was a good college player. He's a terrible athlete, but what if he's just a good football player?
It doesn't even matter. Like, he doesn't even have to weigh in here. Like, the top 3 is maybe as good of a top 3 as any edge rush group in the NFL. And they drafted Derek Harmon. They have Keanu Benton. They have Cam Hayward. They're loaded on the defensive side of the ball. Now, we also said this about the Jets last year, right? The Jets, on paper, heading into last year, they got the 2 bookend tackles. They had a really deep defensive line. Nice secondary. They should have been one of the best teams in the NFL last year as well. Then you have DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers and a young offensive line that can come together. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying – look, I think even their best case scenario, they're a tick below the Ravens. They're a tick below the Bills and the Chiefs and the best teams in the AFC. But I get what you're saying. Like, if Rodgers is some semblance of good, plays within structure, plays within a new system. This is a new system for him, assuming he's not running the show here. With Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator, if he plays within the system, which he's still talented and capable of doing, yeah, you have a good Steelers team. I'd be hard pressed to say that they're like the best outcome is more than like making the divisional round, though.
I don't know. I think they would be different to those other teams. Like the best case scenario I'm envisaging is a sort of the last vestiges of Peyton Manning Denver Bronco scenario. Now, look, that was an all-time great defense. So, but like if they're able to have the best defense in the NFL, let's say that if this Steelers defense this year plays like the best defense in football and Rodgers plays the way he did for the Jets last year, and the scheme is a bit more, conducive to him playing that way, the Steelers are a difficult out for anybody. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, whoever. Like that is not an easy football team to beat in January, regardless of who you are. So I do think that it's a very different, like nobody else would look like that. Like there wouldn't be another team that is built like off a dominant, suffocating defense and a weird, aging Hall of Fame quarterback that's just playing like playing game managing football at this point. But that's what they would be. But I do think that is like that puts contender within the range of outcomes. Now, the difference between them and the other teams is that the other end of the spectrum is way away. Like
you said it. Aaron Rodgers is going to be dragged to the Super Bowl like Peyton in the 2015 Denver Broncos. And I got to get you on with Pony and Mulsey and everything. You got to break it down for them. You have
Pony's definitely said this at some point already.
Oh, Pony has painted this picture at some point. Aaron Rodgers is going to be, even if he's just a passenger, he's on his way to Super Bowl number 2. And just like Peyton Manning got Super Bowl number 2 in his final season, at the very end, Aaron Rodgers will do the same this year. Sam has declared it. It shall happen.
Rodgers' Hall of Fame career is validated by a second Super Bowl in which he was just a passenger and effectively was no different than if they'd played Will Howard the whole way.
What's the worst case scenario? The opposite of that.
The worst case scenario for Pittsburgh is like hilarious circus. Like the Rodgers thing is a joke from start to finish. Like he's antagonistic with the media. They're losing games. Like Rodgers is blaming, microwaves coming down on the stadium. Like the whole thing is becoming a joke. No receivers is a major problem. Mike Tomlin has his first losing season and gets shit canned at the end of it. Like just a complete and total disaster. The whole thing unspools, unravels. Rodgers has to walk off into retirement as a punchline instead of like an all-time great quarterback. We're already seeing him unseated from, all-time teams by people that have played for 4 minutes. Like the whole thing just becomes a complete farce.
You're talking about the ESPN all-century team, century team. We're going to talk about that Monday. Do you guys want to hear that? Do you want to hear instant reaction a few days later to the ESPN? And I guess PFF did the same thing, quarter century team. Listen, why are you critical of that? You and I were just charged with a project where we were ranking the all-time quarterbacks, and you also put Patrick Mahomes over Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
In that list, are you criticizing that? That's what
I think when you're talking about I usually have some sympathy with the idea that a guy's peak is the most important thing in terms of just analyzing how good he was. But when all of the people that you're talking about are like the greatest ever, you can't. Justin Jefferson is on that team, right? Justin Jefferson has played 5 seasons. You're telling me that his 5 seasons are better than the entire careers of like Hall of Fame wide receivers? Because
you're criticizing the criteria. We'll talk about it Monday. We're going to push it to Monday. We're going to do it Monday. We'll do it live.
Yeah. Anyway, so worst case scenario for Pittsburgh, complete and total clown show. The whole thing unspools and everyone's laughing at them all season.
This is the worst show we've ever done. 3 divisions in an hour. I got a meeting at noon. I think I'm going to be late for it.
You got to pick up the pace.
NFC, then we're not going to give the same amount of love to all these other teams.
This is the risk.
NFC North, Chicago Bears, best and worst case scenario.
Best case scenario is Caleb Williams. We come out of this season with Caleb Williams as like he's the best quarterback from this class, right? The Jaden Daniels conversation that we're having now is now Caleb Williams in a year's time. We had it right the first time around. Everyone said he was generational. He's generational. Look what Ben Johnson's done with him. Everything's good. Receiving core is great. Offensive line has been rebuilt. Powerhouse Chicago offense and good fields start to finish.
There was a run of second-year quarterbacks. You put Mahomes in that bucket. You put Burrow in that bucket. Year 2, he went to the Super Bowl. Carson Wentz, before he got hurt, there was this stretch of it took. Year 2 is when a guy not even looked different, but maybe broke out into stardom. Caleb Williams being that guy, I think, would be a big part of the best-case scenario. And all of the moves that they made, the offensive line comes good, the playmakers, everything they've done over the last couple of years comes together and gels. On the other side, I think part of the worst case scenario is this the reinvested offensive line doesn't look great again, and it's because of Caleb Williams, right? We're talking like as much as look, I don't think the Bears offensive line has been great the last 2 years. Playing in front of Justin Fields and Caleb Williams has not helped because of the way they hold the ball, because of the way they maneuver the pocket sometimes. And so if we feel like, oh man, Caleb's under pressure a lot again, it's like, well, it's probably his fault. And so the other part I'd say was if he doesn't mesh with Ben Johnson, who meshed really well with Jared Goff, who just ran his system. And if we get this roller coaster ride, like if there's another year of inconsistency from Caleb Williams, 2 good weeks, 2 bad weeks, that feels like a him problem, not a Ben Johnson problem.
Yeah, I honestly think theirs is as simple as if Caleb Williams looks great, like best case scenario is he looks fantastic and we're talking about him as, the new MVP going forward. Worst case scenario is he looks the same. Right. They made all these changes and it's the same guy, right? The inconsistency because his numbers looked okay. And there were games where he looked fantastic, but overall, clearly it wasn't what everybody was hoping for. If that just repeats with Ben Johnson now in the building and with all these upgrades, well, suddenly you're terrified about the future of this team.
All right. So that's it for the Bears.
See, that was easy.
Oh, yeah, we could do it. Detroit Lions, best and worst case scenario. The best case, Detroit.
Best case is, would that be the most feel-good Super Bowl win?
Let me paint the picture. Let me paint the picture again here. It doesn't matter that their coordinators are gone. They still have Dan Campbell. They've got this young nucleus. They go and they get the number 1 seed in the NFC. Everything's going through the dome, the whole playoff going through the dome. They win your NFC championship in front of their home fans, and they're off to San Francisco, Santa Clara, for the Super Bowl. They take down the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, whoever it is, the Bengals, the Steelers. They take down Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers because you said they were going to be there. And the Detroit Lions, Super Bowl champions for the first time ever.
Yeah. So I think it would be a huge. That in addition to the Super Bowl has got to involve a massive comeback by the Lions and winning the game on an aggressive fourth down call that the analytics would say kick. So aggressive fourth down call. Okay, They score. They've got the classic. Do you go for it? Do you kick for overtime? They decide to go for it. They're going for 2 to win the Super Bowl at the death, and they call a pass to Penei Sewell, and he catches the ball. 2 points, win. Dan Campbell goes nuts. Crowd goes wild. Greatest Super Bowl victory of all time. Greatest game of all time. The most sort of neutral, positive Super Bowl win ever. The Lions finally get their ring. Everyone's happy. Sunset, end scene.
I don't think they need the big comeback. I would actually rather they have a lead and then Dan Campbell goes for it. Like he's up 3, fourth quarter in his own. He goes for it like on his own 11 on like 4th and 6 and gets it on a pass to Penei Sewell.
The other way. So he goes for it like that exact thing. They have the lead. He goes for it on like 4th and 6 at his own 8-yard line, right? They fail. The other team takes the lead because of that. And then he has to do the go for it again to win the game late and does it.
Okay. All right. There we go.
So he's the villain for going for it earlier. Everyone's like, this is the worst Super Bowl call of all time. And then he redeems himself by doing it again later.
And totally redeems himself.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the Lions. The other option is just any Super Bowl. I don't think it would be satisfactory for Lions fans or like pleasing enough to just make it to the Super Bowl. I think you would enjoy the ride. You would enjoy it, but it'd be another year of heartbreak, I think, for the Lions. Worst case scenario, though, of course, is regression, potentially because of the coordinators, Jared Goff regression, maybe not having Ben Johnson. And that would look, we're not going to cite injuries as a worst case scenario here, but based off what we see here, I think the coordinator thing, as we've said, is probably the biggest question mark heading into Detroit this year. And maybe even now Frank Ragnow retiring at center. Yeah.
I mean, serious regression for the first time during this regime, I think would be the worst case scenario. Like, I know that they didn't get as far last year as they got the year before, but I don't think they regressed. Like, I think they were as good, if not better, a football team last season than they were the year before. They just had a weird game against Washington in the playoffs where they turned the ball over like 87 times. And that was enough to propel Washington to the championship game instead of Detroit. And even then it was like reasonably close. But I think the first like significant step backwards would be the worst case scenario. If they came out of this season and you're like, wow, this is not as good as it was, what do we change? Because that would be the first real like challenge facing Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. Like all of a sudden, everything he did hasn't turned to gold. The coordinators leaving had a huge impact, and now we've got to patch this thing back together again. That's probably their worst case. Like, they still might be a good football team, but like 8 or 9 wins good instead of contender good.
So not so much the heartbreak of other teams, but things actually.
No, like I mean, it wouldn't be good, right? If they got to another NFC championship game, lost again, but they'd just be the Bills at that point. But I think their worst case is actually, for the first time, this regime encounters some major obstacles that they're not able to just go through.
There are questions if Dan Campbell can do it without his friends.
Right. Maybe Brad Holmes isn't the genius that everyone thought he was. Yeah. Look, there's a mistake here. Oh, no, he made an error.
Lions social media is going to clip that. You declaring that Brad Holmes is not the genius that everybody thought he was. You're going to be a part of a
out of context clips getting put out for their Super Bowl video.
We should do our own out of context clips and just put it out there. Oh, Brad Holmes, not a genius. How about the Green Bay Packers? Their best and worst case scenarios.
Best case is, youngest team in the NFL again. Actually, it does take the step this time. Like, all the young players develop. Lucas Van Ness shows signs of life, like blah, blah, blah. And they are a contender instead of almost a contender. Like last year, they beat all the rough teams. And then as soon as they ran into a contender, they were just second best every single time. Best case scenario is that just doesn't happen.
I saw somebody, what was it? It was Nate Tice responding to, I think it was a Colin Cowherd segment. So here we go. Where Colin Cowherd was saying, oh, they're just like the Colts where the roster is really good, but the quarterback is the biggest question. And Nate Tice was like, nope, it's the other way. Like, I feel good about Love, especially the ceiling, right? But the rest of the roster is a question. And I agree with Nate, who, by the way, he agreed. He just had a baby, agreed to join the show either next. Yeah, thank you. Agreed to join the show over the next couple of weeks. I agree. I mean, if they come out of the season, not just like Jordan Love approaches the ceiling again that we saw in 2023 in the second half, and I would say Matthew Golden, say the receiving core, you're like, man, there's a star or two there now. Like, they're more established. There's a star or two on the defensive line, better play from Rashawn Gary. Like, if you just look up and down the roster, like a couple corners emerge in a far more consistent in the post Jair Alexander world. Edgerrin Cooper becomes a future defensive player of the year candidate. If you just start looking up and down this roster and a whole bunch of young players take that next step, or a first step in, say, a rookie Matthew Golden's case, then I think you're feeling better about this, because right now they feel like they're a step down from the Eagles, the Lions, the best teams in the NFC, right? But if that changes, then I think that's part of the best case scenario for the Packers. The young guys finally come good. Worst case, it's the same. They feel middling, right? They feel like there's no star power. We're actually too Jordan Love dependent in that 2023 run where they beat the Cowboys in the playoffs. That was because Jordan Love hit this hot streak that now looks like it's unsustainable, right? He's got a couple good throws here and there, but he was out of his mind for the whole second half of 2023. And so I think that's the worst case for the Packers, is they just look like a mid roster with a quarterback who touched some stardom in 2023, but maybe didn't get back there since then.
Yeah, I think Matthew Golden is pretty central to this team's best case scenario. I think the best case scenario involves Matthew Golden looking like the best receiver in this draft class that some people thought he was. The worst case scenario, part of it is they just don't get any better. Like, they basically look like they did a year ago. Part of it is also, I think, Jordan Love centric. You know, I agree that his ceiling is incredibly high, and I think his baseline is pretty high as well. But you know, last year he battled through injuries, and there's a question mark about how much of last year's inconsistency was because of those injuries. If he did exactly the same thing this year as he did a year ago without the injury question mark, I think that is part of their worst case scenario as well, because now the ceiling is looking like much more of an outlier for him than it is a realistic target for the future. And actually, you're dealing with potentially more of a quarterback that's got highs, it's got lows, but his baseline is a little bit lower than you thought maybe it was. But I think their ceiling is still pretty high, or their floor, rather, is still pretty high.
Let's go Minnesota Vikings, because, you know, if I think the best case is obviously JJ McCarthy's good and he's entered into this wonderful roster that won 14 games last year, and he puts up I don't even want to say he puts up a similar season to Sam Darnold. I think that's almost unfair to say, hey, JJ McCarthy, you know, throw 40 touchdowns. But yeah, like, the offense doesn't lose a beat and all the new additions get better, and the Vikings are one of the best teams in the NFC. Yeah,
I mean, obviously their best case involves JJ McCarthy hitting the ground running. If that happens, what is their ceiling?
They're one of the best teams in the NFC. I mean, I think they're right there with the Lions, the Eagles, and everyone else. I don't think they weren't fool's gold last year, as in a one-game setting. Okay, they couldn't beat the Lions, right? They were not, but they were close in a couple games. But with the Lions having a few more question marks, if you threw last year's Vikings team, let's say.
They only lost to two teams. It just so happened that they were the two teams that crippled their season.
So, right, if you took last year's Vikings team and drop them into this year, I think with some questions coming from the Eagles, right? A little bit of turnover in Philly, a little bit of turnover in Detroit. The Vikings are right up there. This is the same argument I'm making for the Bucs, right? The Bucs just having consistency while other in retention, while other teams are dealing with some losses, feels like a huge win for the Bucs. All of a sudden, they might be elevated into that group. I would say Minnesota is the same thing. So for that to happen, you're just dropping JJ McCarthy into last year's team, which, by the way, now has a better offensive line, theoretical better offensive line, better defensive line. They're as good as it gets in the NFC. If JJ McCarthy is awful, then there's your worst case scenario, and the Vikings in turn are not very good.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about last year, they didn't play Philadelphia, right? That was one of the non-crossover things. That would have been fascinating to see what would have happened if that team from last year played the Eagles, because the only two teams they lost to were Detroit and the Rams. It's just that the second time around for both of them, number one, it was back-to-back both times, but number two, the second time around it happened, it was literally the 2 games that ended their season. So it's kind of interesting to know what would have happened if they just avoided those teams along the way somehow, right?
They would have been, I'm not saying overmatched by the Eagles. They certainly didn't feel like they were as good as the Eagles last year. They may have matched up differently than they did. Right. Like that's part of the Lions thing is a matchup, right? If you go roster for roster, I still like the Lions over the Vikings, but the matchup, it's exacerbated, right? Because it just doesn't work well, right? Flores against Ben Johnson historically.
And in particular, the Rams, that's what it was. It was like they matched up terribly with the Rams specifically. I don't know that that's necessarily true with the Eagles. Anyway, it's a moot point. I'm saying
the best case is when you go back through history and it's like Carson Palmer didn't play year 1, looked good as soon as he played in year 2. And Patrick Mahomes looked good in year 2. I'm not saying JJ's MVP and Patrick Mahomes. But you go back to the QBs who, had a redshirt year and then stepped in, hit the ground running, and that's a best case scenario where JJ McCarthy does that with a very good Vikings roster.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's realistic, not even realistic. If it's fair to say if that happens, obviously best case scenario is JJ McCarthy looks good and is the future. But if that happens with the upgrades they've made to the offensive line, to the defense this offseason, is Super Bowl within their best case scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I really think when we talk about the AFC teams, because they're very much QB driven, and it's Bills, Chiefs, Ravens, Bengals, whoever, it feels a little top heavier in the AFC. The NFC feels like you don't know who the best quarterback is. Is it going to be Jaden Daniels? Is it Jalen Hurts this year? Is it Dak in a given year? And then you look at the rest of the rosters. Vikings are pretty deep. The Eagles are deep. The Lions are deep. The Rams are building something there. The Niners a couple years ago were loaded, and now they're rebuilding, but they were close. It's more roster driven. And I would say roster wise, I think Kwesi's done an unbelievable job of, without even hitting on a ton of draft picks, building the depth of this team. And now the most recent place where they loaded up was defensive tackle and interior offensive line. So yeah, I think the Vikings have as good of a shot as any other team to make the Super Bowl, again, depending on what we see from JJ McCarthy. It really comes down to a lot of what he does. Worst case is he stinks. Yeah, I mean, I would also add maybe the Flores defense, doesn't, they've gone from, like, you always described it as smoke and mirrors, and they're kind of taking the league by storm, and there's this late season regression. Maybe that hits earlier and the defense regresses. Maybe they overpaid for Will Fries. Maybe there's some of that. But yeah, JJ McCarthy stinks is the worst case scenario because he's just the unknown. Is it worse if he stinks or if he's just meh? I'll tell you if he's like significantly worse. Sam Darnold was really good last year. Really good. If he's significantly worse than Sam Darnold, but not like a year 1 Bryce Young disaster. So yeah, that's. But like if he had, and that's by the way, really quick, that's like the most likely scenario is JJ McCarthy is not as good as last year's Sam Darnold, but not an absolute disaster. That is the most likely JJ McCarthy outcome because those are two extremes. If he had a year 1 like Bryce Young, he doesn't make it to year 2, right? Like no, absolutely that would be enough that he's lost the job already. And depending on what Sam Darnold does, you're like, man, Kwesi made the wrong move. They should have kept Darnold. But at least that gives you a direction, right? If he plays like year 1 Bryce Young, even independent of the fact that Bryce Young looks like he's coming out of that now, so you can have the debate about what you should do. But if he plays like that, they are basically cutting bait and trying to find a new quarterback next offseason, and at least everyone understands the direction. If he just has an average year where he doesn't look good but doesn't look like Bryce Young in year 1, well, now they don't know what to do. Yeah. That feels worse. Yeah, that might be worse. Mid JJ McCarthy. All right, we got to move on. We're halfway through. AFC South. We're going to the Souths now. Best and worst case scenario. Start with the Houston Texans. Best and worst case scenario for the Texans. Best case, bounce back.
and they're a contender again. Do they have Super Bowl within the range of outcomes? Just looking like last year was an aberration. Didn't really matter. Didn't happen. Take it away and we have continuity versus the year before.
I would say best case is you get back to that trajectory we thought they were on a year ago, which is you put yourself into the echelon of those best teams in the AFC. That's absolutely in the range of outcomes for Houston. And you could argue that the depth that they've built on their team, I mean, position by position, maybe not defensive tackle, but the depth at receiver, in the secondary, edge rushers, that it's up there. Now, the offensive line's got to get better.
Yeah.
All of those moves, they need to show some sort of a sense there. So they still, on paper, look like they're a tick below those other teams. But if a few things break their way, they're in the top echelon of teams in the AFC, and maybe they get over that divisional round hump and they get to an AFC championship and make a run. That's your best case. Your worst case is it wasn't all Bobby's fault. It wasn't all, it was CJ Stroud's regression. The league caught up to him, and he doesn't handle pressure well. And the O-line is, still having issues because you just lost Laramie Tunsil. I mean, that's your worst case.
Yeah, best case involves the offensive line creeping back toward average. I don't think it can be good, but I think it can be a perfectly average unit. And all the stuff we heard about Laramie Tunsil in the locker room and being soft and being a problem, like that's all true. And you actually somehow get better by trading away one of the best left tackles in the NFL. Worst case scenario involves the opposite of that being true, which is actually trading away an elite left tackle on an already awful offensive line is not a good way of making it better. And the entire line remains one of the worst units in football.
I think that's fair. Indianapolis Colts. Best and worst case scenario here. So I would go ahead.
I think their best case scenario is Daniel Jones wins or is handed that job by whatever means and actually ends up looking like a pretty useful quarterback, like looking like early career New York Giants Daniel Jones with the best supporting cast around him that we've seen, and the Colts actually make a surprise run at the division and look like they could have a future with Daniel Jones as a mid-level, mid-contract quarterback going forward.
See, I disagree. I would say, so if you're describing what is the best path to a good outcome for the 2025 Colts, you may have described it, right? If you said, what is the furthest the Colts can go this year, and how would that play out? It probably involves Daniel Jones. But I would say the best outcome for the Colts involves Anthony Richardson, and that he actually looks good, stays healthy, looks good, and you come out of the season optimistic for the guy that has, 800 career dropbacks across college and the NFL, as I said on Monday. To me, it involves Anthony Richardson showing some signs of life. Because unless Daniel Jones is good enough to elicit Geno Smith and a Sam Darnold 40 touchdown season, unless he's that good, you're still back in QB purgatory land, where it's like, is Daniel Jones really the guy that's going to, help us beat the Texans, just the Texans in the South and the other top teams in the AFC? But if Anthony Richardson shows signs of life, strings together healthy, good games, then you're like, all right, give him one more year of experience and we can get there. So I think their best case still involves Anthony Richardson, scratching the surface of his potential.
Yeah, but look, I don't think there's necessarily I don't think you're necessarily in quarterback purgatory in a world where there is a middle class of quarterback contract starting to emerge. And I think if Daniel Jones actually responds to being on the best roster with arguably the best coaching of his NFL career and puts in the best performance of his NFL career, I don't think the Colts are necessarily locked in quarterback purgatory if they then re-up him to a modest mid-tier quarterback contract. I think he could then take advantage of that roster and they could just be a good team who has a worse quarterback than elite quarterbacks. And look, theoretically, the best case scenario for every team we're talking about is Super Bowl, right? But I'm starting to believe that Anthony Richardson becoming an elite level quarterback is in the category of, the Saints or the Browns winning this year's Super Bowl. Like theoretically it's possible, but I don't really see it as within the range of possible outcomes. So I think their best case is actually It's a Daniel Jones one, not a Richardson one.
I will stick with it's different. This is different than after watching 2 years of Zach Wilson. And I'm like secretly curious about Zach Wilson and, Mike McDaniel's offense and everything, cautiously curious.
You just never quit high-end quarterbacks.
Can't quit any of them. But Richardson's the biggest downfall here is the experience factor. And that there's still more unknowns with Richardson than other failed top quarterbacks. That's the only thing. I like the chat scenario. This is the chat, not me. Chris Ballard gets fired. Steve gets the Colts job. So they're theorizing I get the Colts job.
That's best or worst case scenario.
I mean, it depends on who you're talking to here.
Right.
It's best. That would be the best case scenario for the Colts organization, of course.
Oh, okay.
Would be me taking over. They're theorizing, Mohall theorizing I'm going to be on McAfee every week. It's only a 2-hour drive. Not even, I could probably commute. I could just live here in Cincinnati, probably commute. I would say
I've done that commute like in an evening. It's doable.
You've had to do it. I'll get a driver. So I'll be working from the back seat,
from the limo,
and just back and forth. Right. So I'll still live at home. Colts GM. And I'll be on McAfee weekly, and we'll continue check the mic. We will continue check the mic. It's got to be part of my contract. I'll give you weekly updates. You'll get the exclusives on all of my failures as general manager of the Colts.
Perfect.
Worst case scenario is this is a bad football team. Mostly not because I think the roster's mid-ish, right? Solid across the board, probably lacking star power in that sense. There's some similarities to the Packers that we talked about earlier, but the quarterback situation could make this a disaster if they're not good.
So is it worse if they fire or don't, leaving aside the potential successor being you? Is it worse for them if they have Chris Ballard as GM in 2026 or if they don't? Because I think he's done a reasonable job. It's sort of like your Andrew Berry comment. Like, this roster is actually good. It's just that they have no quarterback and they've taken a couple of swings at it and they've been bad swings. So the worst case to me might actually be the quarterback situation is such a joke that it gets Chris Ballard fired with, new ownership, albeit legacy ownership.
Right.
If they just go, it's time to go in a new direction. We're going to bring in our own person. I'm sorry, Chris. This has become untenable and we're going to go in a different direction. And the new guy is worse. And it becomes a terrible team.
Yeah. I think that's a fair worst case. Like, I think the roster's all right. He's had a lot of years to build it. It's all right.
I'm not saying he's done like the best job in the world or whatever, but I think like if you put a good quarterback on that roster, it would be a very different analysis.
No, I agree.
Of the Colts team.
I agree. Let's go Jacksonville Jaguars. Best and worst case for the Jags.
Best case involves Trevor Lawrence looking maybe not even like the generational number one best quarterback since Peyton Manning type of narrative, but like really good, right? Justifies $55 million a year type of really good. And Travis Hunter is either an elite player at one of the two positions he's going to play or some kind of like super, the two-way thing works to the point where even if he's just average at both of them, it's like freaky valuable and, more than enough to make that worth drafting where they drafted it.
Yeah, I think the best, obviously it involves Trevor Lawrence. And like you said, at his best, he was playing top 5 to 8 ball. He looked like he could at least be in the top 5 to 8 quarterbacks in the NFL. Great. I think that's still in the range of outcomes for Trevor Lawrence. So that's part of the best case. I think Travis Hunter I'm with you. Like, either becomes awesome at receiver and dabbles at corner, or he's doing something super special. Like, he's legitimately playing, 40 snaps a game on both sides of the ball and doing it well. And overall, the team, gets back to, they were a playoff team just a couple of years ago. And it's not a crazy difference, I think, in the roster depth. So I think, they're back in the playoff picture and they're pushing the Texans in the AFC South. And they were just in the divisional round losing to the Chiefs just 3 years ago. I don't think that's out of the range of outcomes for the Jags.
Yeah, I really just coming out of this year and not being sad that you're paying Trevor Lawrence $55 million a year, I think pretty much sums up. Like, if that's where you are, that's probably as good as you can hope for.
Worst case, if Trevor Lawrence is underachieving still. And we haven't mentioned injuries for anyone, but I saw this going around the other day that, he's as likely to, he's got, concussion, re-injure potential, and if it becomes an injury-prone world for Trevor Lawrence, where that's been an issue for the last 2 years now. So I think that's a fair thing to at least highlight. The guy that you put all the money in, we probably should have said it for Tua, but if the guy you invested all the money in, if we continue to get this pattern of injury proneness, I think that has to be at least mentioned. Not for every team, but I think in these scenarios where it's been an issue previously.
Yeah, unfortunately for Lawrence, it's kind of, I mean, it's in all areas. He's the central figure in this whole thing. Like, if you come out of the year and you are sad that you're paying him $55 million a year, almost regardless of what the reason is, whether it's because he got concussed again and missed a bunch of games or injured himself in some other way, he's another one of these QBs that does not protect himself well at all, and is the classic example actually of, like, he's a bigger quarterback, right? He's like 6'6", he's huge, and he likes to run. And you're like, well, that guy should be more durable than the guy that's like 6'1", 200 pounds, but he isn't, because he throws himself around thinking he's big and strong and can take it, and you can't really do that in the NFL. So he gets injured quite a lot. So whether it's injury or whether it's just he doesn't get any better with Liam Cohen as his quarterback or as his coach, and you don't feel good about the amount you're paying him relative to other quarterbacks on that kind of money. Either way, I think that's probably as bad as it gets for the Jags. You have given this guy the contract, and for whatever reason, he's not justifying it.
All right, let's wrap up the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans. Best and worst case scenario for the Titans. And not to be too quarterback centric here, but it certainly comes down to, is Cam Ward the dude or not?
Yeah, obviously him looking really good is part of that. But I guess it's the impact that could have on the roster, aside from anything else. Obviously, really the only thing that matters for the Titans is, did they get that pick right with Cam Ward? But how right did they get it? Like, let's say he looks good, but did it work as well as Jaden Daniels a year ago? And suddenly what looked like a fairly crappy roster is like contending, like the same thing with Houston.
Or Stroud 2 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Nobody looked at Stroud and said, wow, great pass catchers, great offensive line, man, great situation. You would say the same thing for Cam Ward. Other than the line, I think they've done a nice job at least creeping back toward average up front, or potentially with Kevin Zeitler, Dan Moore coming in. But if Cam Ward, you're right, like if he's really good and he's elevating this young group of receivers plus Calvin Ridley, he finds a favorite pass catcher or two. The offensive line's a little bit better. I definitely have some concerns about rushing the passer on the defense, but L'Jarius Sneed is still there on the back end. Like, there's still some talent on that defense. Could be a sneaky good season for the Titans if Cam Ward is special.
I mean, if you looked at this Titans roster and compared it to Washington's roster going into last season and Houston's roster going into the year before, I don't think you would say it's clearly worse on paper than those two teams. Like, it's very easy with hindsight to go, well, those teams were better than we thought they were. Who saw the breakout from, X, Y, and Z coming? But the point is, they didn't look like that at the time. That's why Arizona was favored to have the 1 and the 2 pick, because the Texans were supposed to stink. Washington was not supposed to be good last year. We were looking at their offensive line going, this is going to be a disaster for Jaden Daniels, but it didn't. So that's the power, I think, of one of these quarterbacks if you hit on the guy. So I think genuinely becoming this year's version of Tennessee, Washington, or Houston, Washington, maybe not championship game because the AFC is harder, but like, if this team was a surprise playoff threat, that's their best case scenario.
So would you put them? So a similar description of what we said with the Patriots, because it's a little QB dependent. If the QB is special, they could make a run here.
Yeah, because, like, completely confounding expectations. People expect the Titans to be bad this year because the roster around Cam Ward does not look good. Completely changing that narrative by December, right? We're December, they've won a bunch of games. They're surprisingly in the playoff hunt, and actually people are like, whoa, Tennessee, they're legit all of a sudden, That would be their best case.
All right, let's go NFC South now, starting with the Atlanta Falcons.
Wait, did we do worst case?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Worst case scenario for the Titans. They're bad at football.
Worst case is that Cam Ward looks like Bryce Young year 1, and we're terrified.
I think more specifically, play style wise, there's some Levis-like plays in there and just not enough special to offset it. So it's ugly for Ward, or he looks overwhelmed or whatever. But again, you could say that for any first-year quarterback, but specifically to his skill set, some of the some of the wild plays that are on Cam Ward's tape outweigh the special that got him drafted number 1 overall.
They don't even need to outweigh them, to be honest. If he just has enough of those and they're losing games, there'll be a lot more focus on them than there was at draft time.
Yeah, that's fair. And so the Titans having, a young roster where they're trying to rebuild look like a rebuilding team. I think that's possible. And look, I don't know if that's necessarily their record might not be the worst case. I think you want to see signs of life from Cam Ward.
Yeah.
And if you're picking top 10 again, it's not the worst thing in the world because you're trying to rebuild that thing. All right, let's go NFC South. Atlanta Falcons, best and worst case scenario.
Best case is Michael Penix continues to look the way he looked at the end of last season. It's absurd, big time throw rate, and within the full breadth of friend of the show, Zach Robinson's offense. Right now that it's unlocked to its fullest potential, the Falcons' offense looks like one of the best in the league. Let's
combine these things, right? So best case scenarios, Penix looks great. Zach's the hot name coming out, right? And then if we combine this with a couple other of the best and worst case scenarios, maybe me and Zach are like a package deal going to the Colts or going to the Giants. So when that's
not good for the Falcons.
No, it is, because if Zach is the hottest head coaching candidate coming out of this season, something went right. Something went right in Atlanta. They're going to the NFC Championship or something. Something's going good if Zach's getting these head coaching opportunities.
Yeah, I just don't think you can paint their best case scenario being their offensive coordinator is poached.
He's at least in the mix. I'm at least considering bringing him into Indianapolis or New York.
Okay.
All right. But yeah, I think Penix showing the potential that he had down the stretch, the big time throw ability, his ability to just create down the field in this offense that's looking to create down the field. So explosive offense. And combine that with all the pass rusher investment finally comes good, right?
Oh, and they're freakish, weird, once in a lifetime gambles on draft time all pan out, right? This idea of getting Jalen Walker and then trading back up for James Pierce Jr. They look like two superstars.
Add that they trade Kirk Cousins for like a 3rd rounder because somebody's so desperate because of an injury or something.
No. You keep him. You keep Kirk Cousins, and actually he plays happy camper for the entire year. And late in the season, when they're in the playoff hunt, Michael Penix rolls an ankle, and you need Kirk Cousins for 2 games, and he goes and blowtorches, whoever it is they're playing in December in the Dome, and you actually needed him for a couple of relief wins.
So your best case scenario involves Kirk Cousins, winning games in relief,
being a happy camper backup.
I mean, he's probably the best. He's probably the best backup in the NFL.
That's what I'm saying.
Now. It's got to be. What's the worst case scenario here for the Falcons?
James Pierce Jr. Decides he doesn't really care about football that much, and by October he's a healthy scratch for the team. Jalen Walker is a hybrid player, and those have a terrible track record, and he's the new Isaiah Simmons. None of the last year's pass rushes that they drafted show anything year 2, so they still have no pass rush. And Michael Penix Jr. was, in fact, a flash in the pan and doesn't look like the player he looked for a few weeks.
It's kind of a make or break year for this front office, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, not only
a lot of high stakes gambles. I mean, they put a lot of chips in the middle.
Yeah, they did. And they don't have next year's first round pick, right? So they don't have next year's first round pick. They have the dead money essentially on Kirk Cousins. It's not dead because they're paying it and he's still on the roster, but it's dead as in he's not starting. So
dead in spirit.
Dead in spirit. Future dead money of Kirk Cousins. So yeah, there's a lot on the line for this regime in Atlanta. So yeah, the worst case scenario, honestly, worst case could just be like another 7-8 win type of season. And there's none of the gambles are coming good as far as getting them over the hump and into the playoffs. All right, let's go Carolina Panthers, best and worst case scenario here.
Best case scenario is Bryce Young's statistics begin to match the play that he had at the end of last season, and he looks like a genuinely fantastic quarterback for an entire season, which is borne out statistically. If that happens, I mean, they are division contenders. They are a playoff team. Everything's on the up and up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that year, what's this, year 2 of Dan Morgan and year 2 of Dr. Eric Eager.
The doctor.
They get, I think the pass rush, which was awful last year, the moves that they made to bring in Wharton, to bring in the 2 for 2nd and 3rd round edge rushers, Nick Scorton and Princely Umanmielen. they start to look like a much better defensive front. They get Derek Brown back. So the defense takes a big step forward to coincide with Bryce Young. They get a number one in Tetterow and McMillan.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, it was a pretty depleted roster last year, right? You would look at the defensive line, you look at the pass catchers, and you would say the quarterback question exists. If all of those things are flipped a little over a year later, I think that's pretty positive for the Panthers, and they're maybe competing in the South if all of those things come together.
I mean, I think this offense could become really good this year. I think the defense is probably a little way away, but the best case scenario probably involves, like you said, the rookie Skorton, Uman showing just enough to make the defense be okay. And if that happens, this offense could propel them into the playoffs. Maybe their ceiling is limited once they get there, but like Bryce Young balling out the way he balled out at the end of last season, attached to a better receiving core, Tetterow, McMillan, maybe a jump forward from Xavier Leggett, or even just in a more limited role, he's more dangerous and dynamic. That offense could propel this team into the postseason.
Worst case scenario?
Regression from Bryce Young.
Yeah.
Fool's gold last year. And actually, he's closer to the statistical output than he is the player that he was late in the year.
Also, because the expectations were so low after the first year plus 2 games, I'm not saying this is the worst case scenario, but there's also in this range of outcomes here that Bryce Young is just a mid-tier quarterback, right? He's not even as good as Tua. Tua, the guy that's in Miami, who half the fan base is like, Tua's great, look at these stats. And the other half is saying, man, he'll never beat Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. There's a chance Bryce Young has work to do to consistently be as good as Tua, you could say, right? And feel as good as Tua is and put up the type of production that Tua has put up. So there's a chance he just lands in like this middle tier of quarterbacks. And now we're talking a year or two from now, like, is Bryce Young worth $50 million? And you don't know. So that's in the range of outcomes here as well.
Or let me paint you a slightly different picture. Like, what if he's capable of playing, like an absolute baller the way we saw last season? But what if what we saw is an indication of just how fragile his confidence is? Because that really, when you think about it, the way his career has unfolded so far, he was awful year one. He was even worse the first couple of games of the season. So bad they had to sit him down basically for his own sake. And then late in the year, that had a reset. He got his mojo back. He's feeling good. He's playing well. Everything's good. But what if that's how fragile he is? What if he's capable of playing fantastically? But now NFL teams know that if you get him, if you knock him off his game, we are only one ass kicking away from him just going right in the tank. When was the last quarterback you can think of where that was true?
I mean, you could say, what was he in a low pressure situation coming off the benching, or was that high pressure? Like this was his last opportunity.
I think that was low pressure. The pressure was all done once they sat him down.
So the picture you're painting is, going forward, if they are in a division race in the NFC South, are we going to get the best of Bryce Young, or are the high pressure situations going to get to him when he has to, compete with the Bucs or whoever it is?
I'm just saying, what if his confidence is that fragile where, and whether it's a pressure or whether it's like one bad game, whether it's like one of those games where you just get buried under pass rush, like what the Rams did to Darnold last year. Like, what if that type of performance is the only thing separating like Pro Bowl level Bryce Young to like complete collapse again?
Yeah. The other thing I'll add there is, missing out on Milton Williams. They felt like they had a strong need on the defensive line. If they're not going to get that in the aggregate from, Tershawn Wharton and from Pat Jones and the draft picks, and the defense doesn't rush the passer and they're just, bottom tier on that side of the ball again, that would be a rough season for the Panthers. So I think they're just like a lot of the other, Drake May discussions and Cam Ward discussions, very quarterback driven. But if the Panthers were a 5 or 6 win team, or if they, snuck 10, and snuck into the playoffs, I think you could see both of those scenarios. Let's go New Orleans Saints. Pretty much acknowledged as the worst team in the NFL right now, but what would be the best case scenario for a team like the Saints here?
It's got to be Tyler Shuck just looking good, right?
I would say so.
It's kind of the only thing that matters to them this year.
I think if they go into next year not needing a quarterback and saying, all right, we have our future and we can start building up the rest of the roster. I think now if they're picking number 1 overall next year and choosing between Arch Manning and Lenoris Sellers and Garrett Nussmeier, whoever, Drew Aller, whoever the best guy is at the time.
So
that's not
is
the
that
worst
better?
thing. Yeah, that might be better.
Ask that, like, let's put it that way. Which is a better outcome for them? Being Tyler Shuck looking good and being pretty happy about him as your starter in 2026, regardless of how many games you win this year, or being May next year and you got Arch Manning #1 overall and Manning to Manning synergy, New Orleans, everything's feeling good about that. It's perfect. The story writes itself. And now no matter how crappy we were last year to get the #1 overall pick, we feel good about the direction we can go.
I don't even think Arch is coming out next year, but let's
I
would say
ask that as the best case scenario.
I would say having the #1 pick next year, there's a better chance that, because I don't know who the guy's going to be. I don't know if it's Sellers that's going to take the big step. I don't know if it's Arch. I don't know if it's Drew Aller. I don't know who it is. But I think pulling from next year's group at #1 overall or #2 overall, pulling from one of those guys versus Tyler Shuck this year is probably a better outcome for the Saints.
Well, it would be better based off current knowledge. But like the whole point would be assuming Tyler Shuck looks good next year, which would you feel better about? Because it's almost like what's worth more to them, a year's worth of evidence in the NFL versus prior expectations.
Yeah, I just think there's a pretty good chance that we're going to feel good about 2 or 3 of those QB prospects next year. Could be wrong. Probably thought that last year at this time too. So yeah, this is a tough one for the Saints. What's their best case scenario? I mean, if we're talking about how do they maximize wins for this year, they get a lot more production. I mean, Chris Olave stays healthy. The offensive line starts to look better with the 2 young tackles. Trevor Penning takes to guard. They get better production on that defensive line. And some of the veterans in the secondary and in the back 7, just, they could, Justin Reed and DeMario Davis could play well. Like it's not an absolute disaster of a roster for this year necessarily, but it's like the future, right? Because a lot of their good players are getting older and you just don't see a lot of building blocks for the future here for the Saints. That's why they are thought of as the worst team. I don't know that they're the worst team as far as putting a squad out there in week 1, but they're listed there in part because of the quarterback questions as well. Like their top quarterback option is a 25-year-old second rounder. That's why it doesn't feel great for the Saints.
Kellen Moore, feeling good about Kellen Moore as like a head coach after this year would be a part of the best case scenario as well. Like he's always been, even back when he was playing, he was being talked about as a future coach, right? And his tenure as a coordinator has been sort of mixed. It's been up and down. The debate on him has been like it's always been very divisive. There have been, when he's left one team, half the fan base has been like, great, got rid of that guy. And the other half has been like, oh, thank God we finally have Kellen Moore to come in and right the ship. So his coordinator resume, I think, is a little bit debatable, but he's always been seen as a future head coach in waiting. So for that to actually be an optimistic thing coming out of this year would be big. Let me ask you a question about going back to the Arch Manning thing without the risk of derailing this for 5 hours.
Why not?
Would the Manning family step in? So let's say Arch's game plan right now is to, the Mannings play throughout their entire college career, right? Eli, Peyton, they all went 4 years, played out the duration. Would the Manning family say, the New Orleans story is too good, Arch? Like, I understand the plan was to play for 4 years, but the Saints are picking #1 now, and they want you. So it's time. It's time to come out. It's time to go. Let's go.
Oh, I could see that happening. You think the Mannings dictate things, of course.
Yeah. Like
especially dependent on how it goes. If in his first year,
is the patriarch, is the New Orleans guy.
In his first year as starter, he takes Texas to the national championship. He is as advertised. I mean, I do think he looks better than Quinn Ewers as a player and as a prospect and what he's capable of. But yeah, we're early in this. But yeah, I could see that. Arch steps in and is like, no, you're a Saint.
He's like, look, for any other team, we'd be playing another year in college, but New Orleans is here and they're ready to go. So saddle up.
That's your best case. Arch is who we think he could be.
Arch is the anointed one, and everything comes full circle for the Saints.
Worst case is Arch wants to come out and you're picking 8th because Tyler Shuck's got, we always made fun of like that one play, but he'll stand in there and just make some aggressive throws. He's got the Nick Folesian wide range of outcomes under pressure, right? Could be great, could be awful. We'll see what happens. Could be a great Super Bowl run, could be, a bunch of interceptions. If those go Shuck's way as a rookie, the aggressive plays, Saints sneak an extra, they pull an upset. They beat the Bucs a couple times, whatever it is, right? They play spoiler, and all of a sudden they're picking 9th or 10th for a team that really needs, again, young building blocks for the future.
Yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario is the Saints are a terrible football team, and maybe there isn't a great answer at quarterback. The best case scenario, though, I'm painting, that's my best case, right? The Saints are bad this year. They pick a number 1 overall, and the family steps in and says, Arch, it's time to go, son. You're going to become the new Archie. Archie was doing it back in the 70s. It's your time now, right? 2025. It's Arch Manning taking the legacy of the New Orleans Saints. Let's go, baby.
Was Archie even good?
It doesn't matter.
All right, let's wrap.
He's good enough to spawn a dynasty of a family. That's all you need to know.
That's true. Can we wrap? He's the secretariat of football.
The bloodlines.
The bloodlines.
Like when we get to 2029, every quarterback in the NFL is going to be able to trace their lineage back to Archie Manning.
Legitimately, by 2029, it's going to be the entire NFL is going to be Manning, Phillip Rivers, and Rivers' old teammate, Antonio Cromartie. There's got to be a bunch of Cromarties running around. And Tyreek Hill's going to have his, by the 2040s.
2035, the entire AFC is going to be Rivers.
Yes. There's going to be 12 Rivers quarterbacks out there in, year 17 of Patrick Mahomes. It's going to be great. Tampa Bay Bucks. So, best case keeps coming back to, when you're going through all these offseason exercises, and you're like, man, they've got continuity. Plus, everywhere where there might be a weakness, like a recovering Chris Godwin, well, they just drafted Emeka Egbuka to fill in there. So there's depth on this roster. It's homegrown. They're not dealing. Yeah, they're dealing with Liam Cohen leaving, but they've dealt with the offensive coordinator turnover. But they're not dealing with a lot of the turnover the other teams have.
Yeah. I think they have a very high baseline, pretty narrow range of outcomes. Like the Patriots have one of the widest range of outcomes. I think Tampa's is pretty narrow. They're going to be pretty good, right? And I think quite a lot would have to go wrong for them to not be a pretty useful football team. I think their best case probably involves, I think we've seen now Baker Mayfield is a good quarterback, not a great one, but I think he's streaky enough to be able to put together a great season. Maybe he's not a great quarterback, but I think he's capable of a great season.
Or specifically what used to happen.
Or a great run.
The run, right? The Flacco run, the Eli Manning run.
Right.
He could go on that 3 and 4 game run, the Nick Foles run. He could absolutely do that.
There you go. That's more realistic. So let's say they are, again, a playoff caliber football team. They're a pretty good team. They win the division. They get to the postseason. And then week 17 or 18, Baker Mayfield just hits a hot streak and he goes on a run and knocks off a couple of these teams.
I got one for you. You ready? 2018. Yeah, we're going to be here for 6 hours. It's fine. 2018, we're puffing our chest. We're like, man, Baker Mayfield's the best quarterback in this class. The data says it. He's number 1. He's QB1. Yeah. I'm the first one to put him in a mock draft at QB1, feeling all sorts of justified when the Browns make that selection. Feeling all sorts of terrible 2 and 3 years later when Lamar Jackson's winning MVPs and Josh Allen looks like a superstar and Steve looks like an idiot. But this year, Baker Mayfield goes on the run that you described.
Yeah.
The Bucs win the Super Bowl.
The first one of that class to win a championship.
He is the first quarterback from the class of 2018. Not Lamar Jackson, not Josh Allen, not Sam Darnold, not Josh Rosen, not Mason Rudolph. It's Baker Mayfield, the Super Bowl champion, and 8 years later, justified.
This is going to be the tweet that you have that goes the most viral of anything you've done so far. It's going to be all the quarterbacks from that class, and it's simply going to be championships. Baker Mayfield won, all of the rest 0.
Everyone else,
and it's
zero.
going to go to the moon, even though you're not serious when you make it.
Of course, to the moon. But that's the best case scenario here for the Bucs.
Yeah, it probably is.
And all joking aside, I guess my theme with the Bucs this year is while there's a little bit more uncertainty in a few other places, the Bucs are just bringing the nucleus back together. And I think calling them, I don't think they're as good as some of those other teams, but the ability to go on a run because they've got a good enough offensive line. They can run the ball now. They have a good group of pass catchers. Defense looks solid. They're just good up and down the roster, and they're equipped And look, in one game settings, right? Because the other thing I keep saying, like, can they beat the Lions? Can they beat the Eagles? And Bucs fans remind me they beat both teams last year, but yeah, they were worse than both teams, right? But in one game settings, yes, they've shown they could beat the Lions and they beat last year's Super Bowl champion Eagles. In one game settings, they've shown they could play that high end game.
Yeah, like it's not unreasonable. We think that they should be a playoff team. It's not, this is a team where you'd look at them and say, they're not like, it's not like they can't beat any of these teams in the postseason. So you have to at least assume they're capable of winning a couple of those games back to back and maybe go into a Super Bowl. So yeah, I think that is a fair high end range of outcome for them, is to say the Bucs put together a reasonably improbable playoff run and go on and Baker Mayfield's hot streak takes them to a Super Bowl, even if they don't win it, or maybe they do win it. Worst case scenario, though, I don't think it's that bad. I think worst case scenario is they just win or lose a few games they should have won, miss the playoffs, maybe by a game or two, and we're just an average team.
Yeah, it's definitely a high floor team, and I think part of the worst case is maybe the second offensive coordinator change in 2 years does affect Baker Mayfield, and you just get inconsistent play out of him. What do we have left? 8 more teams, Sam. What the heck? AFC West, Denver Broncos. Best case scenario here for the Broncos.
Is it contender as well? Like Bo Nix continues the ascent. Sean Payton is one of the best coaches in the NFL, and the defense is good, and therefore they are rivals to the Chiefs.
I mean, I guess if we're painting the best case scenario, look, I don't have as much confidence in Bo Nix as I have in, say, CJ Stroud. I don't think Bo Nix is as good as CJ Stroud. But I think it's probably a similar range of outcomes where or not similar range, but the similar ceiling is show that they can compete with the best teams in the AFC. Show that you can compete with the Chiefs at the season level, not just at a game level.
They were a wild card team a year ago.
Right.
Like you have to at least assume, the best case scenario for them is step forward from a year ago, which, I mean, we're getting pretty small in terms of window where they can be and not be a contender.
That involves Sean Payton hitting his groove and having these playmakers to work with. And again, the defense was fantastic last year. He added in Jahdae Barron opposite, Pat Surtain. Maybe the defense, because they got a little inconsistent when they had some turnover in the secondary. Jameis Winston, threw for like 5,000 yards on him that one night with 4 picks. So consistency from the defense and just, tightening things up a little bit and still coming at you from all angles with all those pass rushers.
I mean, maybe you can thread the needle and say, look, once they got to the playoffs last year, they got waxed by the Bills. So let's say they solidify themselves as like a playoff team, but a step down from being a real contender. Maybe they don't have, contender within the range of outcomes, but they just become a consistent, we are a good playoff team now.
They end up just being a year from now. Maybe we end up describing them just like we did with the Bucs, which is the fact that they're while the Bills and the Ravens and all these other teams felt like they were a tick above, the continuity that the Broncos have brought to the table, the building through the draft that they've done puts them in a really good spot a year from now where we are legitimately saying, okay, now they're ready to actually compete with the best teams in the AFC.
Or they're like the Lions from a couple of years ago, where they're clearly on the right trajectory. They're going upwards and upwards and upwards, but it's going to take them a few years to get to, come on, now it's time to win a championship.
Worst case scenario for the Broncos.
I mean, it's got to be Bo Nix, like heavy regression of some kind, right? Or just not developing.
I would say, I think the lack of star power on the team catches up. Surtain's a star, Benito's emerging, and Zach Allen, but maybe there's some regression there just on the defensive side of the ball. And then Nix, there's still warning signs about Nix. He's still not consistent from an accuracy standpoint at the intermediate level. That's the place that all the best quarterbacks are supposed to cook. He was inconsistent there. So yeah, just like a roller coaster ride from Bo Nix, I think could lead to some bad outcomes this year for the Broncos.
And I think maybe teams his rushing was such a big part of his game as a rookie. I think a lot of that was sort of catching people by surprise.
Yeah.
People didn't expect that to be a big part of his game. I think with in year 2, the league tends to have a better handle on what you are. I think that's probably going to be a bigger struggle for him this year to have so much success running the ball, because teams are going to be better prepared to stop it now.
I hate to be so quarterback driven here, but the challenge in the AFC, I keep bringing up Tua as the guy that's clearly a tick below the best quarterbacks in the AFC, and what has been missing from the Dolphins, it's their ability to go head to head with the best quarterbacks in the AFC. Like if Bo Nix just settles in as okay, average to good, you're still going to have that question. Like, can he actually go toe to toe with the best in the AFC in particular? So regression from the Broncos across the board, I think is possible. And I would also add just a loaded AFC West. They had three playoff teams last year, but the Chargers look good. The Raiders look better. The Chiefs are still the Chiefs. I mean, it's a team that could win 6 or 7 games just because of the depth around them. So yeah, could go either way here for the Broncos. We're doing best and worst case. You know?
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs. Best and worst case.
Best case is obviously they go back to another Super Bowl and they win it this time.
I also think the way they do it too, if the receivers stay healthy and you kind of get Mahomes back on track and he's, attacking down the field better than he has the last couple of years. I think even just aesthetically getting the offense looking good again instead of looking kind of like trudging through and ball control. I think that's a part of it for the Chiefs, not just, of course, win the Super Bowl is the best range of outcomes here for the Chiefs. So that's it. What's the worst case for the Chiefs though? Like what is the lowest we could actually see from them this year?
Can you even imagine a world where they don't make the playoffs?
I thought you were going to ask they've made the AFC Championship.
I mean, absent Mahomes being hurt, obviously, which is the cheat code for all teams. But like, if Mahomes is healthy, is there even a world where they don't make a playoff spot?
No, I think they've just been way too consistent. I think the more you're asking is like, is this the year that they don't make the AFC Championship? And so the fact that they are in a conference with Josh Allen's Bills and Lamar's Ravens and Burrow's Bengals, and that they haven't slipped up. They haven't slipped up in the divisional round or the wild card round when they had to play there. So I think the worst case scenario is they just don't make the AFC Championship. I think that's they slip up early. Like they run into last year, the Ravens and Bills had to play each other in the divisional round. So I'd say worst case scenario is all those 1-score games start to revert back. They lose 5 or 6 games. They wax the Steelers in the wild card. And they lose to the Ravens in the divisional. They lose to the Bills in the divisional round. That's worst case scenario for the Chiefs. And why does that happen? Uncertainty on the offensive line.
Yeah.
Maybe Mahomes has, settled back into, just being a very good regular season quarterback and not, carrying the team as much as he did early statistically. And they lose to these other teams as the Bills and the Ravens and these other teams just get better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the easiest one to picture. I don't know. Their worst case scenario has to involve that offensive line becoming a problem. Jalen Moore is something of a risk as an answer at left tackle. That doesn't work out. Josh Simmons is there to be a contingency plan if that doesn't work out, but he's coming off that patella. That's a potential longer term injury. Kingsley Suamataia is going to be kicked into guard. Maybe he doesn't work out there. Mike Caliendo was bad there when he was playing there. And Juwan Taylor has not lived up to the money they were paying him. So theoretically, you could have 3 problem spots on the offensive line. If that happens for like an entire season and the receiving core, doesn't coalesce into what it needs to be, even with the return of Rashee Rice, he's returning from a knee injury. It's not like he's just coming back from a vacation. And Travis Kelce declines. There is a world where the supporting cast around Mahomes is not phenomenal.
Yeah, that's fair. Other one would be Tom Brady comes out of retirement for the Raiders and takes the Raiders to the playoffs, beats Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs.
That would be a tough scene.
That would be. How about the Raiders? Best and worst case scenario here. Year one.
Speaking of those Raiders.
Speaking of best case scenarios, Tom Brady comes out of retirement, takes the Raiders to the Super Bowl. He physically benches Geno Smith after 3 games and says, "I'll show you how to do it."
What if Tom just comes back as a red zone quarterback? Like he doesn't have, I don't have the durability anymore to play all the time. But if I could just come in once we hit the red zone to stop Geno throwing a ridiculous pass.
I saw someone say that Brady should be the quarterback for the flag football team in the Olympics or whatever. I think that's cool. That would be fun.
doesn't have to worry about getting hit.
Yeah, that would be fun, actually, looking at that. Maybe I'd watch that. Otherwise, uninterested. Anyway, Peter's best and worst case scenario here.
I mean, best case is probably just they make the postseason, right? In a tough division with a lot of contenders in a tough conference, the Raiders with Geno Smith become not contenders, but become good enough to get to a postseason. They become like last year's Broncos, right? They make the postseason and then they get annihilated by 25 points by the Bills.
That'd be fine. I mean, just to show, and I would also say give the Chiefs a couple games. Maybe you sneak one of those wins. Just show you're competitive against those best teams in the AFC. And I would say this rookie class, I think not that you have to justify the Ashton Genty pick at number 6, but if that guy actually becomes a game changer for that offense and elevates everybody around him, it's like, all right, now I've got...
Yeah. Genty like changing the running back conversation by being that good.
But if you come out of the season and you say, good luck defending the Raiders, they have Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty. Good luck. And Dante Thornton, right? Good luck trying to defend all of these various skill sets that the Raiders have.
Who, by the way, is like, people are talking about him being a starter there based off mini camps or whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
The 6'5", 4'3" guy with freakish, athleticism and stuff may end up being in like a random ass steal in the middle of the draft that could be a dominant force.
If that hits, that'll just be like me pointing to the fact that I had Puka Nacua as a deep sleeper in that draft a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think that's all part of the best case scenario. The defense, Christian Wilkins and Max Crosby, they anchor that defensive line, which looks better, and they just look better under Pete Carroll. I mean, that's the other part is just Pete Carroll and his 73-year-old energy and the whole thing. All of a sudden, they're just like destined. They're a 9-win team at worst because Pete Carroll's there and the culture's different, and you see this future where the Raiders continue to get better.
The vibes with the Raiders are so good right now. Pete Carroll, they're playing with Zorbs and mini camps. Pete Carroll's out there trying to get pins on people, wrestling them during stretches and stuff. Like, everything's great. Everyone's loving life.
We got the big bubble running around.
The Zorb. Geno Smith's a fun quarterback. He's going to ball out. Genty is a generational running back. And okay, maybe they're not going to be contenders. Maybe they're not capable of going toe-to-toe with the Chiefs or any of these other elite teams in the postseason, but they make the postseason. And in year one of a new regime, everyone just feels great about themselves.
You just morphed this into reasons for optimism, and we skewed too far. All right, what's the worst case scenario here for the Raiders?
I mean, the worst case is they're still just not that good. Like, it's a tough division. Geno Smith seems to have a fatal flaw in red zones. Ashton Genty is a running back, and maybe their offensive line isn't as good as it needs to be for that to make a big impact. And, in a division with Kansas City and the Chargers and the Broncos, they may be the 4th best team.
I would almost say, yeah, that's it. Like, they're more competitive, but still the clear 4th best team in the AFC. That's actually not even worst case. It's actually
AFC West.
And that's what I mean in the West. It's actually the most likely scenario, right? They on paper should be the worst team. I guess the worst case would be Geno Smith regression, but we're 4 years into this thing now. This year 4 of Geno Smith. I don't think he's going to revert back into backup status at any point. He's still pretty good, but it's not going to feel great if you make these additions. You invested in Geno Smith, not a ton, but you invested in him, and you're not competitive. You're the clear 4th best team. I think that's going to not feel great. Even in year 1 for Spytek and Pete Carroll, it's not going to feel great for a team that they didn't choose the full rebuilds. They chose the halfway house of bring Geno Smith in. Now, they could still just draft a quarterback next year, and maybe that feels better a year from now. But maybe the worst case is, Geno still feels like a hindrance, like you're behind all of your peers, and you're not in position to draft the next guy next year as well.
I mean, even just a bad Geno season, like not hard regression to like, oh, you're a backup and we made a big mistake. But like, if you just had a low end range of outcomes for Geno season, that would be rough for the Raiders, because number one, it wouldn't be good for them. But number two, like, again, in that division, like that would be bad.
I would also add like Ashton Genty going 3.7 yards per carry and not being able to elevate the offense is not going to.
I mean, Ashton Genty looking like New York Giants Saquon Barkley, right? Where it's clear he's phenomenally talented, but the team around him just isn't good enough for it to make an impact.
Yeah, I think Genty's a big part of the worst case scenario. If things don't go well for him, you're going to be wondering about that number 6 overall pick. Let's go Los Angeles Chargers to wrap up the AFC West here.
They still don't have any wide receivers to speak of, and Justin Herbert remains like irritatingly inconsistent his defenders still say he's one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL, and everyone else is looking at it and be like, well, if he's such a good quarterback, why doesn't he quarterback good?
You jumped right to worst case scenario.
Yeah.
You just skipped best case. Okay. So worst case scenario is the Chargers don't live up to the preseason hype.
Yeah, again. Every year
since 2006, the Chargers do not live up to the preseason hype. Is there best case scenario? Are they the second best team in the AFC West? And so they're just another team, right? When the Har Bowl happened on Monday Night Football, they're just not as good as the Ravens. They can't beat the Chiefs. They can get within a score late, but they just can't beat the Chiefs. Can they take this next step? Because the Herbert thing, it's difficult. Because the people that believe in Herbert aren't just saying, well, he's just this big-armed quarterback, therefore he's always better because he's more talented. Like, he actually plays the game pretty well. Yeah. He's a good quarterback who is also talented. It's not just, if I'm taking the most talented quarterbacks, it's always Justin Herbert, and he never plays well. He's a good quarterback, and he's shown elements of greatness at times, but he's never put it all together. So best case scenario is he puts it all together and in crunch time, and they go head to head with the best teams and get over that hump. Yeah,
I think their best case has to be they're the best team in that division, right? Like Kansas City, because their best case scenario would involve Kansas City suffering some of their worst case scenario. Like if Kansas City's offensive line is not fixed, then the Chargers and Justin Herbert plays his best football with Harbaugh in year 2, et cetera, et cetera. Like the Chargers could be the best team in that division.
I thought, and last year, remember Joe Hortitz and Jim Harbaugh come in. Jesse Minter comes in, runs that defense. They overhaul a bunch on the offensive side of the ball. They accelerated their rebuild, in my opinion, just making it to the play. They were awful in the playoff game, but they accelerated the rebuild. If it's in year 2, the defense that was one of the best pass coverages in the NFL last year, if they just take another step there and they have a good defense again, Herbert in year 2 in that system with better potential pass catchers, and Kansas City's regressing, there's a world where they win the AFC West.
Yeah.
So there we go. AFC West champions, and they make it to they're competing with the Bills and Ravens and the Chiefs going to the title game potentially.
I do think part of their best case scenario is like a complete removing the kind of negative side of the Justin Herbert debate, right? If we came out, like, nobody is criticizing Joe Burrow anymore, right? He's clearly in that top category of like elite quarterbacks with the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, and the Mahomes of the world. It's like a big 4 now. If we came out of this season thinking it's a big 5, if Justin Herbert is just in that category now, instead of, well, he could be in there, but sometimes he's not, and blah, blah, blah. Like, just eliminating that debate would be part of their best case scenario, I think.
All right. Let's wrap it up with the NFC West, starting with the Arizona Cardinals.
So their defense being allowed.
Oh, by the way, sorry to interrupt. I think all 4 of these teams can win the division in the NFC West. So that's going to be a part of best case for all of them, including the Cardinals here.
Yeah. So there's it's sort of, how do you view it? A variety of different ways. Like winning the division, I think, is probably part of their best case scenario. Kyler Murray is a huge question mark at this point for them, capable of some of the best. Like on his day, Kyler Murray is as good as any quarterback in the NFL. It's just that his day doesn't come along that often. And actually, like an extended run of his day hasn't come along for a while now. So that going back to getting the best version of Murray consistently is a huge thing. Marvin Harrison Jr. having a huge year 2 would be part of it. Comes in jacked to the gills, looking like David Boston without the roids, and just looks like the best receiver from his draft class in year 2 would be part of it. And then those 2 things would result in them probably or potentially winning the division.
Did you just accuse David Boston of using steroids?
Yes.
Okay. I remember old ESPN articles. They were like, let's follow David Boston in his daily routine. And it was like, he takes 48 pills per day. That was when people did steroids back then. It was like, I'm going to do this think piece on how you got so jacked and not even like bring up what may be the most obvious reason.
6 a.m. to the pharmacy.
Yeah.
6:15.
They did that with Mark McGuire. Like, tell us about this andro that you're taking. It's like, yeah, it's andro. It's great. It's good stuff. It's like, or you're just injecting needles.
He definitely got popped for PEDs, right? Like, I'm not even making an accusation that was never substantiated.
I don't know. You might be. I'm just saying we shouldn't do that. We've been theoretically sued before.
I've just been assuming that at some point in his career, David Boston got popped.
You're also perhaps jumping to conclusions that Marvin Harrison Jr. is not using steroids. You shouldn't do that either.
Okay.
Can't jump to conclusions here. Anyway,
David Boston gained 39 pounds of muscle mass in one offseason. That's all I'm saying.
The most I gained was 18 pounds of muscle. Sorry.
And you're like 9 feet tall.
Yeah. 18
He's like
pounds
my
of
height.
muscle and 23 pounds total, 5 pounds of fat. That was my best offseason. And I had the frame for it. Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, he's a little bit taller than me, but he's closer to me than you.
David Boston. Did he make our all quarter century team? Find out Monday. All right. Talking about the Cardinals. The Cardinals defensive line.
Yeah.
Everything comes together for this team.
I mean, the defense remaining, sort of well-coached and feisty, but now with talent would be a big part of that team being good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. They win the division. I think that's it. That's a potential. That's a possibility here for the Cardinals. The defense looks great under Jonathan Gannon, very talented up front, and Kyler Murray's more consistent. Marvin Harrison Jr. has a big year too. Worst case scenario for the Cardinals.
Officially, David Boston was in fact suspended for steroids, so we're
okay.
Good.
So that's
legally in the clear.
No false accusation here.
No,
that was a shocking revelation.
I thought the 39 pounds of muscle in one offseason was just chewing down steak every night.
Guy looked like 1985 Hulk Hogan. It's like, I don't know. Just taking 48 pills a day per year. Yeah, I thought it was all clear.
What's his workout routine?
Yeah. Let's go find out how David Boston did this. What's the worst case for the Cardinals?
Kind of another season like last one, right? Where, okay, the defense may be better, but like if Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. look the way they did a year ago, which is inconsistent and not on the same page, that on its own represents the worst case scenario.
The other part, how many times did I give Jonathan Gannon credit for, playing hard and, playing above their skis? Is that just part of the inconsistency of Gannon and his teams?
Right.
Like, I chalked it up to like,
Murray thing.
Yeah, or Kyler. But I was saying like defense in particular, they always seem to step up and compete in these games where it felt like they should have been overmatched, like last year's Niners win. But like if they continue that with more talent, that's an issue. So yeah, I think worst case is just another like a 6-win, 7-win season, right? There's this mid-tier type of season where it doesn't feel like you took any steps forward despite big investment in some key areas this offseason.
But again, I mean, they won 8 games last season. If they just repeat that kind of level, but it's still Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't look amazing. Kyler Murray is wildly inconsistent, and you're just annoyed by it all.
Yeah. Let's go Los Angeles Rams. Best and worst case scenario here.
Super Bowl, baby. The crowning glory of the Matthew Stafford career, and he gets to walk off into the sunset, retire with a Rams championship ring. Sean McVay. There you go, McVay. Sean McVay gets extra validated as the young coach that wins. It's all good. It's all good. Championship. Everyone's feeling good. Devontae Adams gets his ring. Perfect.
No, I think if you look at the ascent of the Rams building this thing from scratch, 2022 into 23, overachieving in 2023 with that young team, and then the stretch that they had last year, which looked nothing like previous Rams teams. Like the offense wasn't even that good, and all of a sudden the defense is averaging 12 points per game allowed.
Right.
So I would say it's the putting all of that together and the fact the offense with Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua as a 1-2 punch, with the Kyron Williams run game, some of the continuity on the offensive line. So get the best of Stafford, and you have last year's defensive resurgence led by Jared Verse. Yeah, I think they're an NFC title championship contender.
The defense just continuing, anything like it was doing late in the season where it murdered the Vikings, where it was, on this incredible run. If it's just anywhere near that, and then what you're capable of doing on offense with Matthew Stafford, with Puka Nacua, and now with Devontae Adams in the mix. And like, it is a championship caliber contending football team.
What's the worst case for the Rams? Because look, we've said any of these teams can win the division. I think the Rams have more of the championship type of potential out of this group as far as like team capable of going on a run. Like, I'll probably pick the Rams to win the division, but I wouldn't be surprised if any 4 do it. But what's the worst case here for the Rams, including, of course, Stafford's getting old. So I think he's one of the guys you have to mention injuries for because he's got a history there.
So that's the thing. I think he's one where it is fair to say, what if Stafford's injuries catch up to him a little bit? He's not just injuries, but like, again, he has played the game more like a quarterback from the 1990s than most quarterbacks of his generation. Like, what if his decline just hits younger than it is going to for most of these quarterbacks? And he's now at the age where, you know, the Joe Montanas of the world, like, these guys started to break down at this point physically and we're kind of done. What if that hit Stafford earlier because he's been Mr. Iron Man for his career and always playing through injuries and always gritting it out and blah, blah, blah. Add that, like, that's the worst thing that could happen, coupled with what if the defense, you know, just doesn't match what it did late in the year? What if, not even saying a Jared Verse takes a huge step back or whatever, but like, as a unit, it was playing insanely good. What if it just doesn't match that? Yeah,
because you're not looking at that defensive, you're not looking at the defensive depth chart and saying absolutely top 5 defense.
Right.
I mean, they have Akello Witherspoon and Darius Williams as the starting corners. That's fine. Like, beyond Verse, it's a pretty good young defensive line, but I don't know that they're, you know, dominant or fierce. They're good. I mean, they're Kobe Turner, Byron Young, Braden Fisk. They're on the ascent. Love it. Love the Poona Ford edition. But you're not looking at that defensive depth chart and saying, absolutely, they're one of the best defenses, but they played like that down the stretch. So, yeah, I think defensive regression plus whatever happens offensively, maybe, I mean, Devontae, you're depending on older players, Devontae Adams, Matthew Stafford. There's a risk associated with that, of course.
And Cameron Kitchens already showed in college he's capable of having a season where he's at the center of every catastrophic play that happens to you in the course of a season. So that could always happen again.
That could happen for the Rams. We had 2 more teams, unless we forgot someone.
Probably did.
San Francisco 49ers. Best and worst case scenario.
I think their best case is still Super Bowl contender. Just because of the offense. Like, their defense may have taken a significant step backwards now. But, you know, Brock Purdy, they've done the work necessary to maintain the talent around Brock Purdy whilst they're giving him the contract now, right? You know, everything was going to change the second Brock Purdy's deal went from like $800,000 to $60 million, you know, or wherever he, not 60 million, but to the high end quarterback money. So they've already done that work. You know, Deebo Samuel's gone. They've juggled the contracts, but that's left them with a group that still includes Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk is back. Ricky Pearsall is there. We saw last season, Juwan Jennings is capable of far more than they've ever needed from him in the past. That is still a ridiculous group of playmakers around Brock Purdy. And the offensive line is still what it was a year ago, effectively. Like, this could still be one of the best offenses in football with a Shanahan system. Like, it could still be amazing. Now, the defense may have taken a step back, but in the best case scenario, it's still playing good enough that this team is still at the sharp end of the season and capable of beating anybody in the playoffs.
Part of their best case is obviously their draft picks hitting the ground running. And as I said, at draft time, important draft for the Niners, just because we knew that they were going to have a lot more turnover as far as veterans go. But Mykel Williams, Alfred Collins, CJ West, if those guys have that influx of youth on the defensive line, I'm not saying it has to feel exactly like the Rams' influx of youth, but that's what they're banking on. It's like Nick Bosa plus we need these young guys to contribute right away. The other thing to remember over these last few years, when Kansas City felt like they were going through a rebuild post Tyreek Hill, Buffalo last year at this time feeling like they were going through a rebuild. When the foundation is still strong, you can have 11, 12, 13 win seasons. That's still possible. And the Niners have that. And no matter what Brock Purdy's getting paid, his production has been unbelievable for the start of his career. And he's very much capable of that. I thought there was a point, again, these things don't always end up becoming neat career arcs. I thought there was a point last year where he was playing the best football of his career, and then that regressed just a touch. So he's got to be more consistent, but the offense being good. Christian McCaffrey is coming back. I just listed him as my best running back in the NFL. I'm not even afraid of double Achilles tendonitis is what that he had. I don't care, So they still are very, very talented. The range of outcomes is high. I just think it's very much dependent on the Ricky Pearsalls, Renardo Greens of the world. They're year 2 players, but of course they're rookies as well, all coming good and replacing some of the talent that's been out the door.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 young players that are really important for this team.
Worst case is they're worse because they're worse. The depth, the lack of depth catches up, particularly on the defensive line, where they're nowhere near where they were 2 years ago on paper, unless those rookies are better.
Yeah, the worst case is the defense is a problem. It ends up sort of looking like just Nick Bosa and friends, kind of like some of those Cleveland Browns defenses where it's been Myles Garrett and nobody else. That's kind of what the defense ends up looking like. By the way, the part of the best case scenario is we've got Robert Saleh back in the building, right? Robert Saleh turns that does his magic on the defense and you get the best version of it. Worst case scenario is it's not enough to overcome the talent and it's Nick Bosa and friends. And then probably you've got to factor in some kind of worst case on offense has got to be the offensive line remains kind of problematic from a year ago. Trent Williams misses a little bit more time than is typical for him. Ricky Pearsall doesn't take a step forward. Christian McCaffrey randomly develops another curious injury that goes from, his leg's kind of sore to actually we're going to shut him down for half the year.
I would just say missing Debo generally, or not being able to replace that aspect of things, even though things look great as far as the depth on paper. Debo was a bit of a game changer when he was out there. Over the years, we had a lot of the on-off, wit-out splits with Debo, with Trent Williams, with Christian McCaffrey. If you miss any one of those pieces, does everything go south like it did last year? So I think that's all
the
fair.
thing. I think it feels like even though they might be a worse team on paper, it feels like their floor is higher than it was a year ago. I struggle to see how they win less than 7 games.
It felt awful last year because of some of the injuries and also just the weird stuff. I mentioned that Arizona game when the Niners were still good. They had kicking issues and they had Brock Purdy's lead in a final drive and there's a batted pass interception to end the game against Arizona.
Right.
They were better probably than their record showed. I think even last year you were like, hey, this is the team I still believe in as a contender, right? Despite their record. So maybe that's just us leaning on priors, but the priors are strong. When Kyle Shanahan has his starting quarterback, the team's good, since 2018. So I'm not ready to write off the Niners.
They're still, by the way, Jake Moody is still their kicker. So I guess that's part of the worst case scenario is for some reason they haven't replaced the guy that can't kick.
Moody remains Moody as a kicker. Seattle Seahawks, the final team. Let us know if we forgot the Titans or anyone else.
No.
Best case scenario for the Seattle Seahawks.
Best case is Sam Darnold last year was for real, and the Seahawks have a steal on their hands.
Steal.
They upgraded a quarterback from Geno Smith, and they upgraded whilst getting cheaper.
They picked up an MVP candidate QB for $30 million.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the best case.
And look, so I guess you have to couple that with the offensive line improving because even if you got last year's version of Sam Darnold, I think the offensive line is potentially problematic enough that it would ding that. But if Gray Zabel, hits the ground running, if Oluwatimi plays better as a center, if they're able to get passable play at right guard, and suddenly you've got to again creep back toward average on the offensive line, and Darnold is for real last year. The work that Kevin O'Connell does is a permanent fix for quarterbacks, and he just is better.
The West Coast offense, the old the Kubiak scheme coming in, rejuvenating the run game, and actually helping the offensive line.
Yeah.
Fountain of youth for Cooper Kupp, pairing him with Jackson Smith and Jigba. I would also add, all right, Mike McDonald's defense. It's year 2. If you're looking at the depth of that defensive line, Leonard Williams coming off of a career year, Byron Murphy still has a ton of potential. DeMarcus Lawrence, I still think he could be the best value pickup in the offseason. DeMarcus Lawrence added as an edge rusher to Boye Mafe and Derek Hall and what they already have there in Seattle. So deep secondary could be a really, really good defense year 2 under Mike McDonald.
No, I think that's true. DeMarcus Lawrence is becoming like your defensive, the great Morgan Moses.
Yeah.
He's becoming like your Morgan Moses. Every year you should just sign DeMarcus Lawrence. He still got it.
You can't because they signed him to a 3-year deal.
Yeah,
They were
but they'll
smart.
cut him after 1 year of not looking good.
That's possible.
And then he can be back on
Coming
the
off
horse
one
again.
injury, the dude could still play. So best case scenario, Seattle wins the division, right? So that's
Yeah, I think
in the
it's
cards.
it is.
Darnold is because we go back to listen to the archives. After year one of Geno Smith, we were like, I got to see it again. Another year of Geno Smith. After Baker Mayfield, got to see it again. Got to see it, right? And those guys pretty much did. I'm not saying they're, Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, but they all, pretty much kept similar production and they maintained their status as rejuvenated starter. If Darnold does that, it's a pretty good team. All right, on the other end, worst case is the last 2 weeks of Sam Darnold were the truth. were the reality, and the uncertainty on the offensive line, uncertainty at receiver with an aging Cooper Kupp, all of that stuff comes back to bite.
So it's either, the last 2 weeks version of Sam Darnold was the real Darnold, and he goes back to seeing ghosts, New York Jets Sam Darnold, or that the only thing standing between him and that is an awful interior offensive line, which Seattle will have on a weekly basis if that group, doesn't improve. So in either case, the results are the same, that you just have a meltdown from Sam Darnold and no quarterback. And instead, what you did was take a pretty good quarterback and trade him away and replace him with a guy that has no business being a starter. That's the worst case scenario.
Jalen Milroe plays football. Is that part of the worst case scenario, meaning things didn't go well for Darnold, or you found something in the third rounder?
Yeah. So, the worst case scenario is that all the moves they made this offseason made them worse, right? Like you took a good quarterback in Geno Smith and you traded him away.
Yeah.
Okay. You can debate whether that was forced or not, whether you could have fixed that or whether it was just the way it went. And then the same thing with DK Metcalf, right? You had this nice 1-2 punch of JSN DK Metcalf, and you trade away DK Metcalf and you've replaced him with Cooper Kupp, and maybe he's just old and busted. Like the worst case scenario is that all these moves you made instead, or before you got to let's fix the offensive line, made you worse. And you might not have fixed the offensive line after that.
I like it. That's a good worst case
scenario.
That would be bad. Seattle. I think they've built a pretty good roster top to bottom, but yeah, I could see some of those holes working onto that worst case. All right, man. That was fun. I think we hit everybody.
That was long.
That's a long show. We got to wrap. Yeah, we got to wrap this up. I said we were going to be quick. We were not.
Yeah, good one.
Good show. Fun times. The ESPN quarter century team came out this week. I thought there were some interesting names that made it, that didn't make it. I thought that was worth maybe doing a show and discussing. We're going to let us know if you want us to do that on Monday. As of now, we have it penciled in. We could pivot, go somewhere else. But yeah, we're going to do that for Monday, most likely. And then just a programming note, we're going to be off the week of 4th of July. So June 30th, that Monday, July 3rd, that Thursday. No shows that week. We'll have a couple pre-recorded the next week. Give the whole team chance to recharge the batteries, as they say. Enjoy a little summer. Go boating, do whatever you want to do, and then we'll be back, strong in July, particularly late July, getting into the studio and
probably do some work in the studio during that time.
Actual studio work. Yep. So it'll be good. All right. Anything else?
No. Let's go.
Great. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Monday with more. Check the mic.